Special meeting of the Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee will now come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Alvarado.
Here.
Senator Yates.
Present from district.
Thank you. Representative Bridges.
Here in the room.
Thank you. Representative Frazier.
Present in the room.
Representative Marzian. Representative Hale.
Present.
And Senator West.
Present in the room.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, we would like to welcome Senator Alvarado, our newest member of the committee. Congratulations, Senator Alvarado. You picked a great meeting to start out with. Most meetings are probably not going to be this exciting. The purpose of this meeting, specially called meeting, is to review two regulations brought forward by the governor. And we will begin today. We will start, I'm going to do them separately. There are two regs, and if we need to, we will take the full 2 hours if necessary. I'm going to start with KAR 702-001-195E, face coverings in school facilities.
702-195 emergency establishes provisions relating to required face coverings in school facilities for individuals, including students, school employees, contractors, and visitors, and exemptions from the face covering requirements.
Would those representing the cabinet and KDE please identify yourselves for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Jason Glass, Kentucky Commissioner of Education. I'm joined by Board Chair Lou Young and General Counsel for the Kentucky Department of Education, Todd Allen.
Thank you. And just so you know how this meeting will flow, I'm going to let KDE speak, and then we have numerous people signed up to speak for and against. I'm going to let those people speak, and then we will come back to KDE, allow a short rebuttal period, and then we will open it up for committee questions. So that's how it will flow, and you can begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We appreciate this opportunity to speak with you regarding the Kentucky Board of Education's recently adopted emergency regulation regarding universal masking in schools. And I understand that this issue has generated significant differences of opinion on the appropriate course of action within our schools, communities, and across the Commonwealth. None of us wanted to be in a situation where we were continuing to battle COVID-19, the sickness and death that it creates, and all the mitigation steps that we've had to live with for these past 18 months. If there's anything that should unite us on this issue, it's that we would all like to have this behind us and as soon as possible. Regrettably, that's not the situation we find ourselves in today. Documentary evidence that we have provided supporting the Board of Education's regulation on masking lays out the rationale that the board relied on in taking action, so I'll not take up more of our time in going through that. Suffice it to say that COVID-19, including its evolutionary shift to the Delta variant, is not finished with us yet. We collectively have failed to take the necessary steps to put this virus in our past. The virus doesn't respect political boundary lines between counties, states, or nations. And as a pandemic, it has moved well beyond being a personal health challenge or choice into a public and global one. Managing COVID-19 has been an iterative and dynamic process from the start as we all work to better understand this virus, how to protect our schools, our communities, and our own families from it. The virus has adapted and changed, which requires us to also adapt and change as well, unless we want the disease to continue infecting, sickening, and killing in our communities unchecked. The regulation that the state board has instituted marks a return to the universal masking requirements that schools had in place all of last school year. So this shouldn't be perceived as something new and different for students attending our schools and those working in them. The people working in our schools and learning in them know how to do this. And they've proven that by using masking in combination with several other COVID-19 mitigation efforts, our schools can stay open for in-person instruction. I understand that some want to argue with public health and medical experts, but in this case, even if we set those aside, we can rely on our own lived experiences in Kentucky schools. If these layered COVID-19 mitigation efforts are put in place, which include universal masking in our buildings, we have shown that we can keep our schools safely open for in-person instruction. I'd like to speak for just a moment on the nature of the leadership positions that we hold and the difficult decisions that we face, like this one. It's rare in our roles that we get decisions that are easy, that have clear answers and around which everyone agrees. And it is indeed a rare delight that we get one of those easy decisions. And it feels good to act in a way that everyone supports and where we can make a positive impact. But much more often, the situations we find ourselves in are dynamic, they're changing, they're complicated. We're trying to process through an avalanche of information, some of which may be conflicting in what it informs us we should do. Also, in these difficult decisions, we find ourselves navigating important and positive, but also ultimately competing values, where perhaps no side is really wrong, but the decisions that we have to make require us to prioritize some values over others. I wish that this were easier, but making tough decisions such as this one is what leaders are called upon to do. We have to weigh all the variables and then create clarity for the way forward. On this specific issue of the board's masking regulation, there are certainly strong and positive values that have been put forth why no such action should be taken. These values include statements about the importance of local control and decision-making, and about personal health choices and responsibility, all of which are important and are valid. But we have to balance those values with protecting the health and safety of our students, especially our most vulnerable students who stand to lose the most if they're unable to go to school into what will be a third year that COVID-19 has disrupted learning in our state. So we must prioritize and consider the value of protecting the in-person learning and experiences of our students. KBE Board Chair Lou Young will speak in just a moment on the importance of those learning experiences for our students. But when deliberating on this issue of a universal masking requirement in Kentucky schools, our Board of Education clearly and unambiguously prioritized the values of protecting the health and safety of our students and of protecting the in-person learning experiences of our students above all other values. While some may disagree with the decision they made and prioritize other values, I'm proud to stand with, and Kentucky should be grateful for, a unanimous state board who puts the health and educational interests of students first in their decision-making. From both a moral and a policy standpoint, if we value the health of our students and their learning experiences as most important, then the decision that they made was the only good and right course to take. I'd like to close with a story that perhaps you may not have heard as you make your deliberations. This is a photo of Casey Stalker, who is receiving her 16th chemo treatment this past Thursday. I'm sorry, Cassidy. Cassidy is battling brain cancer, and this weekend she spent her 4th straight day in the hospital. She also received her 3rd COVID-19 immunization, a booster shot, this past weekend because her cancer treatments compromise her immune system. Because of her weakened immune system, she and her family know that the booster shot is going to make her feel bad, but that COVID-19 would make her much sicker and possibly take her life. Her mother, who I think you'll also hear from a little later, told me that she takes this booster shot not just because it will help protect Cassidy, but because it will also protect her classmates, her teachers, and her family. And this is ultimately the reason that we wear masks, to protect our students and everyone around them. Cassidy's brother is 11, and because of that, he's still unable to receive the vaccine, but is at risk of contracting COVID-19 and bringing it home to his sister. But because of the universal masking procedures that are in place in their community in Oldham County and now across the state of Kentucky, Cassidy and her brother were able to attend school in person last week for the first time in 518 days. We need to take the actions necessary to protect the children in our state and get these transmission numbers down in our communities. So kids like Cassidy and her brother that are in every community in Kentucky can go to school. and so that there can be hospital space and an ER bed available when Cassidy and other sick kids need them. Members of the committee, you have an important opportunity before you today. We need your help, and we need your support in keeping our students and our community safe from COVID-19 and this Delta variant, and in keeping our schools open for in-person learning experiences that we can all agree our students desperately need. I hope that you send a clear signal as to which values you prioritize and help us in keeping our students safe and our schools open for in-person learning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll now turn things over to our board chair, Lou Young.
Thank you, Commissioner Glass, and thank you, co-chairs and members of the committee. My name is Lou Young. I'm an associate clinical professor in the College of Education at the University of Kentucky in the Department of Ed Leadership Studies. I'm also a retired P-12 educator and school administrator in Kentucky schools for more than 31 years. I'm now the proud chair of the Kentucky Board of Education, and I'd like to share a few brief remarks regarding the State Board of Ed's emergency regulation requiring face coverings in all schools. While mask wearing alone is not a singularly effective strategy, Kentucky schools proved last spring that a layered mitigation approach led to returning our schools to in-person learning and keeping them there. Returning students to a safe, in-person and learning environment and keeping them there was our main goal as the state board as we considered this emergency regulation. Last spring, and in some cases even earlier, districts and schools did an admirable, even remarkable job of implementing a comprehensive set of COVID mitigation strategies as every Kentucky school returned to in-person learning. By layering together vaccinations of school personnel, social distancing, hand washing, and other hygiene efforts, along with mandatory mask wearing, our educators, leaders, and school employees have already proven that we can do this in our schools and stave off serious disease transmission. I am proud of the efforts of Kentucky schools and districts, and I am confident that the same layered approach will go a long way towards safely keeping our students in school in person. When I talk to students, families, and educators, they consistently tell me that their main goal is the same as that of the KBE, to get our kids back in a safe school environment and to keep them there. More specifically, to that end, mask wearing will reduce the number of students who must quarantine outside school based on CDC and Kentucky DPH guidelines that schools are required to follow. When there is a positive COVID exposure in a classroom, students who have not been in close contact with the infected person and have been wearing masks will be much less likely to contract the virus and less likely to have to quarantine outside school, thereby decreasing time away from in-person learning and keeping schools in session. Again, safely returning students to in-person learning and keeping them there remains our priority. Lastly, as Commissioner Glass noted, schools have the responsibility to provide safe learning environments for each and every student. And the state board is required by law to promulgate regulations when necessary or advisable. Based on the expert guidance and advice from the CDC and Kentucky public health officials, we determined that this regulation is necessary and is certainly advisable. And the members of the Kentucky Board of Education voted unanimously to approve this emergency regulation. I should also note that in the motion, we further limited ourselves to immediately calling a meeting of the state board to withdraw the regulation as soon as the mask guidance relaxes. It has never been the intent of the board to extend the face covering requirement any longer than is necessary to slow the spread of the virus and reduce the number of quarantine days and sick days that keep students out of school. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Anything else from KDE? Or I'm
No,
sorry,
Mr.
from the
Chair.
board?
Thank you.
Okay. We will now move into people who are signed up to speak. We have a long list of people. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my discretion on groups of people groups that are represented. I may give them a little bit more time. But if you're an individual, please keep it to 2 minutes. I'll have a clock up here, and I'll please try to keep it tight. The way this will work is right now we're only speaking for or against the face mask regulation 702.001.195E, which is school mask mandate. So if you could keep that in mind. And the first group on my list is the Kentucky Student Voice Team.
Good morning. My name is Pragya Upreti. Right now, I should be in class, but I'm missing school because I feel a deep sense of urgency to share both my experience as a senior at Lafayette High School in Lexington and my expertise as a co-leader of the Kentucky Student Voice Team. The Kentucky Student Voice Team strongly supports the statewide mask mandate for schools and the Kentucky Board of Education's regulation. While we were hopeful to return to school this year without masks, rising COVID-19 cases and the spread of the Delta variant have clearly made doing so unsafe. Despite what some have said about the negative impacts of wearing a mask in schools, public health experts tell us that masks are the least invasive way to protect students and educators and ensure a return to the type of education experience we know and miss. Over the past year, Audrey and I have spent, and about 24 other students of our team, have spent hours trying to understand the experiences of Kentucky students other than ourselves during this pandemic. Specifically, last year, the Kentucky Student Voice Team surveyed nearly 10,000 students from 119 of Kentucky's 120 counties. What we found in our Coping with COVID study resonates with my own high school reality and underscores the need for us to do whatever it takes to ensure that Kentucky students have a shot at more in-person learning this year. Spending nearly my entire junior year of high school on a virtual learning platform was not easy. Among so many other things, I missed the casual banter with friends in the hallways, easy access to teachers when I needed extra help, and so many of the extracurricular activities that make learning fun. I wasn't able to receive the same level of education to the same standard as before the pandemic, and I was not alone in that. The young people that we heard from told us that academic achievement was not the only thing that suffered. The middle and high school students who responded to our survey told us that increased responsibilities at home and work, changes in physical, financial, and emotional safety and stability all created drastic challenges for them as they remained stuck at home. For weeks last spring, I was fearful of removing my mask to eat lunch in a cafeteria crowded with students face to face with one another. I want you to know that there was, and still remains, a great deal of discomfort in doing that. But worse than masks at lunch is the prospect of having to eat lunch alone again, and for long stretches at home. The social isolation was crushing. I feel the weight of COVID so profoundly because I've spent a sizable chunk of my teenagehood grappling with its daily uncertainties. Beyond the fear of getting and spreading a deadly virus are the more everyday questions. Will my Wi-Fi hold up? When can I see my friends again? What will college look like for me? And again, from our Coping with COVID study, I know it's not just me. Nearly 1/4 of the students we surveyed, of the 10,000 students we surveyed, described a negative change in their future plans. So, like so many other students across our state, I have had to adapt to changes I could never have previously predicted or imagined. But if there's one silver lining, it's this. With that uncertainty has come growth, and I've learned something crucial in the process. Sometimes, making uncomfortable decisions, like the decision to keep a mask on at all times in school, or making the tough transition online last year, is necessary. Sometimes we need to think about our commonwealth ahead of our own comfort. As a high school student who willingly wears a mask to school each day, and as a high school researcher who's heard the voices of thousands of Kentucky students about the overwhelming need to maintain in-person learning, I implore you to uphold the mask mandate in our schools. Prioritizing the health and safety of young people should not be rooted in politics, but instead guided by informed decision making. Thank you. Hello, I'm Audrey Gilbert, a junior at Frankfort High School, which is located about half a mile down from the Capitol, and I'm also a co-leader of the Kentucky Student Voice team. This month, my school, like many others, eliminated our virtual option and brought all students fully back in person. Even though we're masked up, no amount of face covering can mask the anxiety that my peers and I face every time we walk down the hall and see that student who thinks that they don't have to wear a mask. That student who says, well, I'm fully vaccinated, the rules don't apply to me. This past year and a half of the pandemic has been rough on everyone. The fear of catching and transmitting COVID has held me back from participating in many quintessentially high school experiences. Last year, I was fully virtual. I only went into the school building for special occasions like math exams. And every time I would go into the school to take these math exams, I would freeze with fear seeing some of my classmates with their masks down, completely disregarding their own health and the health of others. I would go home after those exams panicking, not about how well I had done on the test, but worried about whether or not I caught this virus that could hospitalize my immunocompromised mother. The knowledge that I had done everything I could by wearing my mask to school wasn't good enough to calm my nerves. When I found out that I would be going back to school fully in person for the first time in almost 18 months, I was reasonably anxious. I know my classmates and teachers well enough to know that if masks were optional, we would stand no fighting chance against COVID because some would choose comfort over safety. Thankfully, my district was cautious. Frankfort Independent listened to public health experts who told us that masks offer a critical barrier to the Delta variant. The district required masks from the beginning, but after speaking with peers and friends from around the state, fear still lives on in districts where school leaders aren't stepping up and doing the right thing, but rather battling science, compassion, and empathy with baseless arguments that show timidity instead of strength. Attending school fully in person now, I'm still anxious about the health of my family, along with the thousands of other things that high school students go through every day. Knowing that the Kentucky Board of Education will mandate masks until the virus is no longer a looming threat gives me a bit more comfort that all schools in Kentucky are united in our effort to keep students safe and healthy and in school. Wearing a mask is a simple action that we can all take to show that we love our neighbors. This is not an issue of partisan politics or popularity, but an issue of health, safety, and equity for our students, teachers, and communities. Superintendents and local boards pledge to serve these groups, but by adamantly opposing this simple precautionary measure, they are breaking that promise. Mandating masks keeps schools open and students learning across the state without the added pressure of poor internet connectivity, unstable home learning environments, and the lack of direct support that we've all seen over the past school year. To members of this committee, I implore you to consider all children, all teachers, and all families. Consider their health, both physical and mental. Keep in mind the students who have compromised immune systems and the students who live with people who have compromised immune systems. Isn't it the job of our representatives to represent the most vulnerable among us? We call our great state a commonwealth because it means our government will be there for everyone, standing to protect each one of us when we're under threat. But if we do not fully support the Kentucky Board of Education's mask mandate in schools, we will set our state up for failure. We will leave our communities at risk and create a future where young people like me can no longer trust our Commonwealth to act in our common interests. Surely Kentucky can do better than that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next we have Shannon Stalker. She here in person or on Zoom?
I'm on Zoom. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great.
We're able to hear you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Senator West. I'm going to start off. I am the mother of the child that they mentioned earlier. My daughter, Cassidy, has brain cancer. She's currently on active chemo, which compromises her immune system. And today I'm here on her behalf, but also for every other medically fragile child in Kentucky. I asked my daughter last night what she thinks about the possibility of overturning this mandate, and these are her words.
If they overturn the mask mandate, I will feel unsafe because my numbers are they drop every time after chemo, and I'm not as protected from viruses when my numbers are low, and COVID can kill even children. don't have any medical problems, that don't have low counts. But for me, if my counts get low and I'm at school and I happen to get COVID, it could end my life, and that scares me. That really scares me.
I have a bachelor's degree in learning disabilities. I have a master's degree in neurobiology, and I attended medical school, but I do not practice because I was sick for 7 years. But neither my education nor my own personal experience could have prepared me for the nightmare that my family experienced last year when Cassidy was diagnosed with cancer during a pandemic. Because of the recent mask mandate, her oncology team unanimously approved her to return to school after 518 days at home, along with her 11-year-old brother, which is a right that every child in this beautiful state should have. I've heard a lot of claims about masks not working, impairing speech development, decreasing oxygen levels, and I will counter those claims with peer-reviewed, physician-led studies that I will email to the board later today. But perhaps the most upsetting claim that I have heard is that it should be a personal choice. This is akin to saying that people should be able to smoke and blow smoke in children's faces or drink and drive. Children like mine, whose lives are literally at risk if they catch the Delta variant, deserve better. No one's choice to wear a mask is more important than my child's right to live. Even the Supreme Court agrees. Just last week, they upheld IU's decision that students must vaccinate or be fined, citing Jacobson versus Massachusetts as precedent. This 1905 mandate required every adult to be vaccinated against smallpox without exception. Why? Because the law was a legitimate exercise of the state's power to protect the public health and safety of its citizens. The requirement was cited as being neither unreasonable nor arbitrarily imposed, and the same goes for this mask mandate. The state of Kentucky's incident rate
We're at 2 minutes. We're at 2 minutes. If you could wrap it up, please.
Absolutely. Last week, my child was asked to wait in the parking lot of the ER for 3 hours, and she was not seen. She was turned away. She deserves better. All children, but especially, are vulnerable to do better. So I implore you to keep doing better, keep the mandate in place for them and for her. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Karen Worthen. Karen, are you here in person or remotely?
Could that be Kristen Worthen?
I've got Karen on my list, but I don't have a Kristen, so it must be you.
Okay.
You are.
All right.
We can see you and hear you. You've got 2 minutes. You're free to proceed.
Thank you. We kept our elementary age children home last year in order to protect their medically fragile little brother. Theo is 3.5, and he was born with a single ventricle heart, essentially half of a heart, and he's immunocompromised. Our elementary children's education suffered last year. One of our kids was formerly in the gifted and talented program, but while virtual, their math scores dropped by 50 percentile points. And we're gonna have some catching up to do from that. This year, my kids have no choice but to attend school in person. Not only is a virtual option not available, but there is no form of hospital, school, or anything for siblings of medically fragile children. Last year, we learned that masks helped our children to attend school safely. And currently, COVID is impacting children more than ever before. So why are we considering removing the masks right now? We don't want them forever. We want them when we need them, and now is that time. Personal choice is not just personal, because someone else's choice not to mask could result in my kids getting sick or worse. It's a fair prediction to say that COVID cautious families would mask if it was left up to choice. And those that are not cautious would not mask, meaning the mandate would be allowing those at the greatest risk of spreading COVID. Repealing the mandate would result in those at the greatest risk of spreading COVID to bring it into the classroom. My 3.5-year-old has to be rushed to the ER for every single fever. If it's a bacterial infection, he could go septic very, very quickly. Right now, we're hearing reports of hospitals around the country at or near capacity, including Texas Children's, which is the largest hospital system for peds in the country. Requiring masks while transmission is high will help ensure my child and other medically fragile children like him can get the care that they need. The vulnerable families in our state have been told long enough to stay home so that everyone else can get back to their lives. My kids do not deserve to suffer because others refuse to share the responsibility of public health. Thank you.
Thank you. We have next Katie Basham. You'll have to hit, if it's not on, you'll have to hit that button. There you go.
There you go. Thank you.
You're
Hi.
free to proceed.
Hi, my name is Katie Basham. I am a public school parent, a concerned citizen, and a Kentuckian.
Katie, could you pull that?
Yes.
Pull that just a little closer to you if possible?
Is that better?
That's better.
Great, thank you so much. I'm a public school parent, a concerned citizen, and a Kentuckian. My son, who is 11 and too young to be vaccinated, was thrilled to be back at school last week for his very first day of middle school. And I'm so grateful that our district, Berea Independent Schools, decided to listen to public health expertise and implement its own mask mandate nearly 2 weeks ahead of the start of school. I've been told by other public school parents in our district that that decision is what led them to send their kids to school rather than choose a homeschool or virtual option. I was hopeful that other districts would follow and prioritize the health and well-being of their students, staff, and families, and prioritize the need for our kids to have the best possible chance at in-person instruction. I understand that for someone in this committee, this is a matter for local decision-making. As someone who served as a parent rep on my son's SBDM for 4 years, I am a huge advocate of local decision-making. As a product of Kentucky Public Schools and CARA myself, that element of local decision-making is something that I value greatly. I also know, though, that there is a place for the state to act, and that there are places where the state is entrusted to make decisions that are in the best interest of our kids and families. And I would say that to disregard the role of the state in these matters is short-sighted at best and dangerously irresponsible at worst. And I'm assuming that you know that in Kentucky, an astonishing number of our children are being raised by grandparents and even great-grandparents. Pre-pandemic Kentucky led the nation in the number of kids being raised by grandparents or other relatives, many of whom themselves are vulnerable populations due to age and pre-existing medical conditions. These caregivers deserve a chance at raising these kids in a healthy way. Practically speaking, are districts across the state prepared for the inevitable when there aren't enough subs to cover teacher absences? We're already seeing the beginnings of staffing shortages, and those will only be exacerbated if we eliminate the one line of defense that science and common sense tell us can mitigate the spread of COVID. Finally, as a parent, I am exhausted. I'm exhausted by being in a constant state of risk assessment and risk management, because I have seen that my fellow Kentuckians aren't willing to accept their piece of collective responsibility for the health and well-being of our fellow citizens. If you care about the health and well-being of Kentucky's kids, of your friends and neighbors, if you believe that the state does have a responsibility for our kids and families, you will uphold this measure. I don't know how to convince members of this committee or my fellow Kentuckians sitting in and inside and outside of this room to care about each other, to care about our children. I don't know how to ask you to do that. So please uphold this rule so that our kids have a shot at in-person education, so that our vulnerable populations can remain as healthy and safe as possible. I am proud to be a Kentuckian. And while we can be proud of lots of other Kentuckians, for example, Jennifer Lawrence, I'm not interested in the Hunger Games playing out right here in our Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Blankenship. For any speaker that comes forward, you may have to pull that mic closer. That's especially important for people on Zoom to be able to hear. Please proceed.
Can y'all hear me all right?
We
Is this
can.
okay?
Thank you.
My name is Rebecca Blankenship. I'm the proud stepmother of 7 children, 5 of whom are school age. I live in Rep. Fraser's district in Berea, and my kids are at Berea Independent Schools. I wanted to say I'm very grateful to the school board, the Kentucky Board of Education, for having created this mask mandate. I believe that it makes our children much safer. My 2 10-year-old identical twins, their names are Connor and Seamus. They have blonde hair. It's curly. Connor is a little bit cross-eyed. Seamus just lost a tooth. They're too young to take the vaccine. President Trump developed that. He spent a lot of money and a lot of time so that we could all be safe in schools. Well, we're not to the point yet where our youngest and most vulnerable are going to be able to take that vaccine. I'm here as a mother who loves my children very deeply to ask you please to make the right choice, to make sure that children like mine, like Connor and Seamus, can be safe. I would ask, I know that there are legal concerns, that there are questions about hypothetical things like the ability of the governor's powers versus those of the legislature, the importance of local decision making. I would ask you to weigh those concerns meaningfully against concerns like the lives of children and like the lives of the medically fragile people that we've heard about today. I truly believe that my children's lives are valuable. I believe that every life is valuable. And I hope that if you do consider voting in favor of preserving these mandates, that will be done with an eye toward preserving every life. Every life is valuable. If you can't, if you don't think that you can make that vote, then I think that you should be able to justify to yourself in your mind a list of people that you're okay with dying. With a list of teachers, Rep. Bridges at McCracken County High School, with some at Montgomery County High School, Senator Alvarado, and with some at Berea Independent Schools, Ms. Fraser. Whether those are parents, grandparents, or children, I think that you should make a list. And I think that you should be able to say to yourself, well, that's okay with me. We protected local choice. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Chuck Eddy.
Thank you for your time. You need to uphold the Board of Ed mask mandate. The way to beat COVID-19 is with a holistic approach. We need all parts of this: vaccinations, masking, social distancing, and avoiding large crowds. You have large crowds when you pass in the schoolway as going from class to class. We need masking. COVID-19 is easily transmissible, it's highly contagious, and it's deadly. It's already killed at least 620,000 Americans. It has killed at least 7,451 Kentuckians. With the Delta variant, more and more school children are being infected. Masks are an important way to reduce the spread. These mask mandates are necessary to protect students and school staff and everyone at child care facilities. These mask mandates are necessary to do everything we can to maintain in-person teaching. Half of the children in schools are under 12. They cannot even be vaccinated yet. My grandson is 9. He can't be vaccinated yet. We don't need people saying individual rights trump public health. They don't. Your rights end when they endanger others. Yesterday, Governor Beshear reported 2,100 new cases of COVID-19. 548 of those were under 18. 25% of our new cases are children under 18. We need mask mandates to protect our children and school and child care staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Chris Henning.
Good morning. My name's Christopher Henning, and our family resides in Bullitt County. I'm here today to address my concerns on the poor decisions made recently about mandating the use of masks on our children. I know we will hear plenty of data as to why we should not be masking our children, so I will not be repeating that data. I'm here to remind our legislative leaders of some key facts that are being overlooked with these decisions. These reminders are not intended to insult anyone's intelligence, but merely as a reminder to those that need it. Our War of Independence was not for tea or taxation. It was fought because the British Crown refused to acknowledge that the rights of men were granted by their Creator, not an earthly being or institution. This nation was founded on this belief and was written into our founding documents. These rights today still exist for every American, and in no way can be taken away by any earthly being or institution. In our Declaration of Independence, a list of repeated injuries and usurpations by the Crown are listed, of which we can see 2 that are synonymous with the actions of Governor Beshear and Kentucky Department of Education. 1, he has refused his assent to the laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. 2, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and acknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts as pretended legislation. The Kentucky Bill of Rights further tells us in Section 1, rights of life, liberty, worship, pursuit of safety and happiness, free speech, acquiring and protecting property, peaceable assembly, redress of grievances, bearing arms. It says all men are by nature free and equal, and have certain inherent and inalienable rights, among which may be reckoned, first, the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties. Let's take a quick look at the definition of liberty. Merriam-Webster states liberty, the quality or state of being free, the power to do as one pleases, freedom from physical restraint, freedom from arbitrary and despotic control, the positive enjoyment of various social, political, and economic rights and privileges. And last but not least, the power of choice. Why do we continue discussing issues that are very clear in our national and state constitutions? Just as much as I should have the choice to wear a mask, another individual also has the same choice to wear the mask. That is America. That is Kentucky. As a veteran of this nation, I find it shameful, just shameful, that we cannot follow our founding documents. My oath and yours says we are to support the Constitution. Mask choice adheres to the principles of liberty. Have courage and stop being afraid. And I will close with this. If masks work, why have masks not worked? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Chuck Thurston. I think he's on Zoom. We can see you, but we cannot hear you. Dr. Thurston, I think you're muted.
There, I think I got the mic on now.
We can hear you now.
Good.
You have 2
sold
minutes.
one cell phone.
You have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
I'm a board certified emergency physician for almost half a century. I've worked in 9 states and almost as many countries on foreign medical missions. I have more degrees than a thermometer. My last year was spent as a COVID ICU hospitalist managing ventilators and pronouncing hundreds of people dead. I'm perfectly aware of the seriousness of this situation. I started out working at Billie Jean King 471 FEMA Hospital in New York City, where we used hydroxychloroquine, and to my knowledge, nobody died. I then proceeded to work up the Rio Grande from Edinburgh to Laredo to El Paso, where we had somewhere between a 95% and 75% death rate, and no hydroxychloroquine was used. I'm not here to speak on behalf of that medication. all of my patients that died had been wearing masks. I got COVID. I'm almost 70 years old. I have hypertension and diabetes, and I am allergic to lisinopril, which is an ACE inhibitor. All of my patients who died in El Paso, I talked to families many times, had either a relative or themselves been allergic to lisinopril. And that's the ACE, angiotensin-converting enzyme site that the COVID virus enters. Zinc kills the virus, and other medications introduce zinc to the virus. Everybody was wearing a mask. I wore a mask. I wore an N95 mask properly. But masks do not work. You might just as well put up a screen, a chain link fence to keep out the mosquitoes. It's that different. That's how big the difference is between the 1 micron virus sizes and the web and the weave of most masks, including an N95. Surgeons and doctors like myself use masks properly. We don't touch them. We don't touch our face. We don't have saliva on them. Most people who wear masks actually spread the disease. They get it on their hands, and the primary mode of spread is not respiratory. It's touching your face with your hand, touching your hand on the doorknob, and another person touching the doorknob. I'm extremely sympathetic for the fearful nature of people who have people who are children who are immunocompromised, but masks would not help them one way or the other. This is not an issue. Masks don't work, and all cells have the same rights that we do. They have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness was described by Claude Bernard in the Sorbonne in the mid-19th century as homeostasis, or a steady state. And a living cell is different than a dead cell because a living cell can alter its environment. And they also have the right to alter or abolish any government that is contrary to those ends. And so a virus, an RNA virus, are simply forms of government that have been introduced to a perfectly healthy cell and commandeered that cell, told that cell what to do, subjected it to death, refused to allow it to do its job that the DNA of that cell would already have it do, and stops the pursuit of happiness. So we have been endowed by our creator not only with those rights, but the mechanism to sabotage viruses.
Doctor,
when the virus comes into the cell.
Doctor, you're at 2 minutes. If you could wrap
Well,
up.
when the virus comes into the cell, it sabotages the virus. And viruses do not mutate. They are sabotaged by the cell. And social distancing eliminates that, masking eliminates that. So masks do not work.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Elizabeth Park.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. You have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, yeah, I just briefly wanted to give a little bit of different perspective. I'm an attorney. I've worked for the Kentucky Supreme Court, and I also have a background in products liability. So, you know, I just coming at it from a product angle and a product safety angle. And I think that just assume for the sake of argument that these masks actually work and they are going to protect our sweet little Cassidy on chemotherapy, because I think we've all established that it's really the medically fragile and the compromised we're really talking about. So assuming even that works, is that there a risk?
No, go that way. Go down here. Go that way.
I'm sorry. Is there
Hold
a
on
risk?
just a second. Doctor, if you could please mute. If you're not speaking on Zoom, if you could please mute.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize it. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No worries. Thank you.
Hi, are we back here? So I'm saying even
You're good.
Even
Please
assuming,
proceed.
I'm sorry. Even if we assume we can protect our very medically fragile, sweet children, is there a risk to the healthy children of wearing this product in a way that it was not meant to be worn? And just to explain that, like, you can have a product that is safe for a certain use, but it's not safe if you have too much of it. For example, you have an ache, you take an ibuprofen, that's fine. But if you take the whole bottle of ibuprofen, you can become very ill. So that would be misuse. So say if a mask is safe, I know you go get chemotherapy. If you get a shot, they're going to give you your infusion. They give you a medical mask. You put it on to stop the droplets. And the minute you're done, the minute that injection stops, they take it off and they put it in the biohazard. So that's a brief mask wearing. Is wearing it for 9 hours a day, which is what my student has to wear it. Is that going to be dangerous? And I've sent you documentation of research that I'm not going to say answers the question yes or no, but it certainly creates a lot of questions that I think should be looked into as to whether this extended mask wearing will cause long-term oxygen deprivation, too much carbon dioxide, and neurological problems that may not show up till later. I'm talking about long-term use in children, and it's not being looked into, and this could be misuse, and I hope you will check that out. Thank you.
Next, we have Marcy Timmerman.
Hello, I'm Marcy Timmerman. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. I'm here today as a public school parent, a PTA member, and a person with a disability. I'm not here representing my employer, who many of you may know as Mental Health America of Kentucky. While mental health is an aspect of the COVID-19 and pandemic response, it's not why I'm here today. Today, I'm here because my ability to work is directly impacted by the mask mandates in schools. My talents don't reside in the areas related to being a homeschooling parent. I respect those who make those choices, but it's not for me. My son is in the 2nd grade and has had no problem whatsoever with wearing a mask to keep himself, others, and myself healthy. He and his friends all prefer going to school with masks over being out of school. They also like doing something, anything that can help this pandemic end faster. We have a wish jar at home of things we'd like to do when the pandemic is over. We were blessed and able to do some of those during the short window before the Delta variant started covering the United States, but there are a lot of pieces of paper in the jar still. Why are we being so careful? Why do we need a wish jar? I have an autoimmune disease that thankfully has become far less severe thanks to a current round of medication. That medication makes my immune system less effective. Vaccines for COVID-19 are less effective for people like me, possibly even after a 3rd shot, which I'm hoping to get this week. Add to that some other medical conditions I have, and you get a mix of very real concerns about my dying if I contract COVID-19. Requiring masks in schools makes it possible for me to send my only child to school outside our home with prayers for his safety in mind. I'm far from the only Kentuckian who is working, who is caring for a child, who is caring for aging parents, who has underlying health conditions, etc., who could be taken out by this disease, statistically speaking. Having our children, teachers, staff, etc. masked helps all to make a decision to send them to school, freeing us up to do the other tasks our families and communities need us to do. Since the middle of last week, I've listened to healthcare workers, mental health professionals, disability advocates, parents, family members, librarians, teachers, and so many people before commenting here today. They aren't able to be here in person or online. They're performing the tasks we need them to do, taking care of our loved ones who are their patients, our community, our children, etc. But the largest response from all the groups I'm in, including those that generally hold vastly different views from mine, not an echo chamber, is that we support this mandate. We need the masks. We need COVID to end, and we need to stop losing people to this disease, whether by death or through long hauler symptoms or the metabolic disease that affects children. A veteran friend wanted me to make sure I spoke to you briefly about that viral pandemics are a direct threat to national security. There's an urgent need to combat public health threats cohesively and consistently across this country. That's not my area of expertise, but one I'd love for each of you to look into personally. There's apparently a lot of history for executive leadership rules that centers on defense-related concerns.
You're at the end of 2 minutes, if you could wrap up, please.
Okay. You already know there are economic implications of pandemics. My contacts who are entrepreneurs are concerned how quarantines and time out of school will affect their businesses. You all have heard from those folks before. By speaking today, I wanted to be on record that parents, family, teachers, and even children really do support this mandate. You may not be hearing from them, but they're busy doing their jobs, and I'll be returning to do my own after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Ray Arnold. Okay. He is in the overflow room, so we're going to wait for. We will come back to Mr. Arnold. Never mind.
My boys sit on either side of me here. Oh, these are very comfortable chairs. You can hide down there too.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to come here and speak today. I took my mask off because I've been vaccinated since April. And being vaccinated since April, I feel great. And I want nothing more in the world for the Lord to allow me to vaccinate my children, or the CDC, whichever first, whatever way I can. I want to vaccinate these kids. I want the choice to vaccinate my kids before the mask mandate is done away with. So, the points I wanted to make in that way is that parents with kids under 12, like Nathan and Lincoln here, we have no choice at all in this situation. We haven't had any choice this whole time that COVID's been going on in Madison County, because we haven't gotten to vote for school board since COVID started in Madison County. So I think it's a majority of parents who believe in COVID and believe that it's a threat. We do not think it's the mark of the beast. This is not the mark of the beast. This is a real virus that's come that is threatening our entire country right now. Our stability, not only our stability internally, but this thing it's doing to all of us where we're fighting. Now, my boys were over in the waiting room playing with kids that didn't have masks on. And you know what? They get along great. And I don't want us to mess that up with stuff like this. Because it's not about them getting along. It's about the distractions in the classroom. People that are poor, in poverty, you do not have the option to do virtual learning. So a large number of people in my county are not able to speak for themselves. The vaccines are almost here. And also, please don't expose the school districts to the potential legal liability. There's legal liability that could come for our school districts. They might lose their insurance. That's going to be our next step. That's all we have. If you all do this, the people that are against the mask mandate, it's happening in other states. The only card that we have left to play, it's hardball politics, but we will go after the insurance. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be up here. I don't want to be up here. I don't want to be here. And so just table this discussion. All I wanted to say was table the discussion. Just table it until we know more, until the matter is resolved in the court system. That's the job of the court system, to resolve disputes between the legislative body and the executive body. That's what we need. We need the court system to decide, and if you all could table this, just table it. Just table it until the courts decide or until we're out of the red zone. Please, please, God bless you. Thank you. Boys, would you like to say anything? You're welcome. This is Nathan, age 8, or 11. He's 8.
You need to push the button.
There you go.
There you go.
Last night I was talking to my dad because he was saying, about coming here, and I was scared, when I going to school even with masks last year when we went back, and it's gonna extremely scare me if we do take off masks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and this is Lincoln, age 8.
Onion.
He's here. That's all we wanted to say. We're going to go enjoy our last day together before school starts tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Oh, here, say it real quick.
These are my pictures. This one has a mask, and this one doesn't have a mask.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
You're quite the artist.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have on the list Delvin Williams.
Go now.
My name's Delvin Williams. I'm just a common man. I've got 3 children in the schools. We talk a lot about the experts. There's experts that depend on each side about as much up one way as there is the other way. Whenever I was in school, I was taught about fact and theory. Theories is based on opinion. Facts is based on proof. Talking about the mask, we all know that wearing a mask, they've been people that still got COVID. As a doctor before, he said he wore N95 mask correctly, but he still got COVID. Now, one of the facts about the mask, about the cloth mask that most of you's wearing here today, is that COVID will still go through that mask. These are the same masks that most of the children is wearing in the schools today. The masks are not effective against this disease unless it's an N95 mask, and from what I've heard from the doctor, it's not even, the N95 mask is not even, totally able to block this disease or this COVID. We want to me, the most of this is political. We want to put our children in the middle of a political discussion that shouldn't be allowed. As one man stated before, this country was founded on freedom. We should have the freedom of choice to let our kids wear a mask or not wear the mask. There's no proof, there's no fact that that mask is going to stop the disease or the virus. It's been proven that the virus can go through it. My children all have said that, they wear the mask, they'd rather not, but the reason that they won't take it off is because of the trouble that they'd get into at school. We've got our kids afraid to stand up for their own thoughts and beliefs on the situation. I'm totally against the mask mandate. It should be a choice. That's basically all I've got to say. I hope you stand up for the majority of the people that believe it is the choice of the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just as a reminder to the audience, if you are going to speak, you have to be signed up to speak. So I just want to make that announcement. I'm simply going by the list of sign-up speakers. So next on my list, I have Terry Cohen.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. You have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Terry Cohen. I'm the mother of 2 children that attend schools in McLean County, Kentucky. I'm attending this meeting today to speak up for them and other children who have had no voice in these decisions. As I listen to the board's statements, I hear them refer to themselves as our leaders, yet the board was not elected by the people. According to an article by the Kentucky Health News on August 12, 2021, the sitting school board was disbanded and the current members were appointed by the governor as one of his first actions in office. This gives the appearance that the school board may not be acting solely in the interest of the children, but is instead a partisan arm for the governor to push his agenda that he was not able to achieve through normal governance. This board and our governor do not represent all Kentuckians in agenda, but do have the responsibility to represent all Kentuckians in duty. Secondly, I live just outside of a small rural town of approximately 700 people located in McLean County. Very few people wear masks and have not worn masks throughout the pandemic, but due to our sparse population, COVID outbreaks have been low. According to chfs.kentucky.gov, we have a total case rate of 0.2% as compared to Jefferson County of 17.3%. To impose the same restrictions on a rural area as a large city is ill-considered, and to make decisions at a state level as opposed to a local level without reason is clearly an overreach of power and simple incompetence. It should tell you something that the same article by Kentucky Health News previously mentioned states that when given the option for local schools to make the decision, less than a third chose to implement mask mandates. Who do they think they are that they know so much more than 2/3 of Kentuckians? This is arrogance and virtue signaling disguised as righteousness. Lastly, there's a cost benefit aspect to everything we do in life. How do we know that this impact, what impact this will have on our kids, not seeing each other's faces, to treat each other as lepers to be avoided, and to be afraid of the adult's reaction if they cough or sneeze? The young ladies at the beginning of this meeting that are so scared of their peers who dare show their face is not healthy or normal, and I worry for the mental health of these children. How are young kids supposed to learn to enunciate words? These restrictions being placed on the most vulnerable population who cannot speak up for themselves, who are taught by their parents, myself included, not to push back at adults. You should be ashamed of yourselves that you're covering your own butts and you're not thinking of what you're doing to these children long term. And I pray that if anything happens to these children long term, that every single one of the people responsible for these mandates will be brought about in a class action lawsuit.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Jared Burgess.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Jared Burgess. I'm here representing my wife, who is a teacher in the public school system, and my two children who attend public school in far western Kentucky. Me and the folks that came with me today got up at 3 o'clock this morning to drive several hundred miles to be here. We feel it important. Just a few points. I don't have research and data. Extremely hard to follow what I just heard. That was the best representation of what I believe this whole issue is about. But a couple things. Commissioner Glass opened by stating that something to the effect, I was scribbling notes, and something to the effect of a difference of opinion. That is true. There is a wide range in difference of opinion here. What is not open to an opinion is the Constitution of the United States of America. Freedom is not open to opinion. It's granted to us. It's given by God. And so he also stated something about a move, how this thing moved from a private health issue to a public health issue. In other words, what I hear when that is stated is that I am no longer able to make the best decisions for my 9 and my 6-year-old. Rather, he will then take, as a bureaucrat, those decisions from me and make them for me. That's what I hear when I say that this is moved from private to public. One of the last things I want to say, it is absolutely terrible, the children that we've heard about today. I would absolutely pray for these kids. But the fear mongering that has come about by throwing these children to take away individual liberty from the rest of us is absolutely repulsive. I believe it to be repulsive to do those things in an order to make the rest of us scared to go to school, as folks have stated here today. Absolutely terrible. The thing that we stand for, the reason we drove 4.5 hours to get here today, is simple: individual liberty. Absolutely individual liberty for the right that I have to raise my children the way that I see fit. Thank you for your time.
Next, we have Rita Yates.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee. I came here today from Lawrence County, Kentucky. I have 5 grandchildren in the school system in Lawrence County, Kentucky. I'm here to speak on behalf of my children, but for the children out there who do not have a voice in this. Just to give you a little bit of a background about myself, I have recently retired from almost 30 years of critical care nursing, and I've been trained in how to properly wear a mask. And what I'm seeing done in the public is improper use of a protective piece of equipment. For a mask to be used properly, it has to be changed frequently. To send our children to school for 8 or 9 hours in a mask is not the proper use of a mask. I read what the KDE put in their criteria. You can tie almost anything on your face and call it protection, but that does not protect you from this virus. If you read on the side of a mask box, it will tell you it does not protect you from this virus. What protects you is good hand washing and keeping your hands away from your face. And what I see in the public, people pull at their mask all the time. That is the transfer of infection, is the constant handling of it. The gentleman that was up here earlier, he threw his on the table. I don't know how long he breathed in it, but I'm at risk right now. I'll go back to my seat and I'll cleanse my hands because I'm conscious of what is out there. COVID is a real thing, but we can protect ourselves best when we are consciously aware of our environment and we use protective equipment properly. And to breathe into a mask all day is not protecting our children. I would consider it abuse to send your children to school to breathe in a mask all day. And I'd like to say I really concur with Miss Terry Cohen, I think her name was, because we should not have bureaucrats who've been appointed by an executive branch dictate to us what we can do with our children, because fear has been pushed as the narrative. And I'm beginning to feel that fear and funding is ruling, and that's wrong. That's wrong. In Sweden, it was the only Western country that did not shut down. They did not shut down, they did not mask, and they kept K through 15-year-olds open the entire time. If you were sick, you stayed home. Not one child perished. Not one child perished. I feel for the children that were presented earlier, Cassidy, the immunosuppressed, those who are vulnerable. That's what we've always done, is take care of the vulnerable. We protect the vulnerable, the elderly, those who are immunosuppressed. The healthy have never had to prove their health. They've never had to have a swab stuck up their nose to prove their health. We are conscious people and can take care of ourselves. But I'm telling you, the increased risk of using a mask improperly is fearful to me. I understand these ladies are fearful to take their mask down, and I'm saddened by that. But we cannot live in fear. Like the veteran said, we've been given liberty to choose, and we should be able to choose for our children. We should be able to choose for our children what's best for them. If the mask makes you feel comfortable, wear the mask. But my children need to breathe free. My children need to breathe free. And I would ask that you would not allow the lawlessness of our governor to go unchecked. He is currently under an injunction by the Boone County Circuit Court.
Ms. Yates?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Yates, you're at your time. If you could
Okay,
wrap it
thank
up.
you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dawn Perkins. I have Mrs. Perkins, and then I have one more speaker. As I stated before, Mrs. Perkins and our next speaker are parts of larger groups, so I will give them probably a little bit more leeway on time. Just want to make that announcement, but Mrs. Perkins, please proceed.
I would like to first of all thank you, Senator Wise, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today on behalf of the Kentucky kids and families of the Commonwealth. As you stated, my name is Dawn Perkins, and I founded the Let Them Play movement here in Kentucky in August of 2020. I started it.
I got to stop you there. I think you're an unusual speaker. I might have to ask you to push the microphone back a little bit. Your voice really carries.
My group will appreciate that.
We can hear you. Thank you.
The Let Them Play movement was started in August of 2020 after I'd been home and stood 6 feet apart outside in the yard with my nephews and listened to their concerns of having a sports season. It wasn't the idea of sports that was concerning to me. It was the anxiety that I could feel hearing them. And when I went home, I wrestled with the idea that if my own, not mine because I don't have children, my own nieces and nephews felt the way they did, then I knew that there was 80,000 other student athletes in the state of Kentucky that felt the same way. That first little bit was kind of like wrestling alligators and riding elephants. It was intense as the group grew to 30,000 people in 2.5 days. There were many people across our state that claimed, if you can play sports, we can go to school. And at that point in time, I reminded everyone that they are student athletes and students first. And that's when I got involved with the academic side a little bit more intense. If you remember in August of 2020, districts had worked all summer long to determine a plan. Only for 2 weeks, give or take, before that plan was supposed to be started, the governor decided that the plan wasn't good enough, and he sent all the kids virtually. No open houses, just Chromebooks, and good luck. Meanwhile, the stress and anxiety continued to increase, but no one spoke of their mental health or overall well-being. I commend those leaders in those positions in Kentucky for accepting it and doing everything they could to get those kids back in the classroom. Shortly after late fall, if you remember, another mandate was put in place. Kids were all back virtually. Sports were put on hold, leaving the kids feeling once again like a yo-yo, and no one still was talking about their mental health. As January came in, you as legislators returned to Frankfort, and our group became involved with House Bill 208, an opportunity for all kids to be in the classroom. We also became with Senate Bill 128, an opportunity for kids to redo the year. And then we got involved with House Bill 563, an opportunity for parents to have school choice in the upcoming year. The key word in all three of these opportunities is that the key word in all three of these were opportunity. As the 2021 school year ended, many felt an end was in sight. We would begin a road of recovery, academically, mentally, physically, and emotionally. However, the closer we got to back to school, the narrative was changing, and it was changing fast, and you could see it coming a mile away. As of last week's unexpected KBE regulation a normal school year doesn't seem likely for 21-22, which is now year 3 of education interruption. So I ask you, where's the end game? If you want to know how the students and parents of Kentucky feel in my group, let me thank you first of all for asking, because you're the only group in government that has asked thus far. They are exhausted. We are in now year 3 of education and life interruption for a virus that is clearly not going away. They are extremely worried about the effects that this is having on their children's mental health, and again, a subject that no one discusses. They are concerned about wearing a mask that has no data supporting its ability to stop transmission or its long-term effects on the overall health of children, both of which have been discussed already today. In addition, they are frustrated that our own Commissioner of Education, Jason Glass, would describe them as mildly a nuisance in a recent superintendent's meeting for writing and being concerned about their kids' education and overall well-being. In addition, they are frustrated with the fact that the commissioner did not stand with the desires and the recommendations of the Superintendent's Advisory Council. And finally, they are angry that our governor has once again dismissed their children and the leadership within our local districts, all in the name of public health. If you want to know the truth, they feel that their children are being used as political pawns by taking away all the hopes of a normal school year with a KBE regulation that was rushed through the back door quickly, unexpectedly, and not needed as a 30-day mandate was already in place. In addition, they are troubled that our governor would thank the KEA and the JCTA and not educators as a whole and make statements such as, I gave you the right choice, or I gave you the choice to make the right decision. And finally, they are passionate for their kids and trust the decision-making process back in the school, and it should be left in the hands of local districts. As of last week, approximately 3/4 of our districts had made the decision to work together with everyone, and everyone understood that the virus could change and the narrative in the schools could also possibly change. It might be the first time in my lifetime and your lifetime that for once everybody in a community was working together for the benefit of education. I'm a product of public education. My mother was a public educator. My grandmother was a public educator. And mind you, she had a degree from Georgetown College and taught for 52 years, because when she taught, you could retire and go back and teach again. I grew up on a farm 30 miles north of here, and I live in Lexington. And I can confidently say that all of the needs of Kentucky kids are not the same. They vary county by county. They vary region by region. And I believe that no one understands a community and its needs like a superintendent, administration, faculty, staff, parents, and kids of that community. There are over 400 miles separating Pikeville and Paducah, and a blanket approach to mitigating a virus simply is not in the best interest of our kids, our communities, and our future. And furthermore, with a virus that is clearly going to be a part of our life forever, where is the end game and who's going to hold the briefings on the mental health of our children? We are living in a time when there's a pandemic, a crisis, and a governor who continues to insulate and isolate himself from the entire state and has since March 2020. And today, I urge each of you to be who you needed to be as a child and hold the line for our children and the future of Kentucky.
Thank you. This is our last speaker in this section. I have Sarah Durand with the Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman and committee members for allowing us to have a seat at the table today. It's been well established, and you've heard it said over and over and over again, that COVID poses a very small risk to children, a smaller risk than even the flu. But the Kentucky Board of Education has never issued a mask mandate during flu season, which you think that they would have done if this regulation were actually about protecting our children. Despite that, they passed this regulation as an emergency regulation so that they could avoid public comment. The public comment period is essential for government transparency and accountability. This was not an emergency, as this regulation was redundant to a mandate that was already in place through an executive order. It's not an emergency because it's a virus that we've been dealing with for over a year and a half that has a vaccine that's been available to adults for months. In fact, educators had access to this vaccine well before higher risk groups, just so that we wouldn't be in this situation that we're in currently. The emergency passage also usurped local control. The governor had advised school districts to mask all children, but some school boards and superintendents weighed the minimal health risk to children against the negative psychological and learning consequences and chose to leave the decision to mask or not up to the parents. This is a much better approach than a one-size-fits-all decision by unelected bureaucrats who are more concerned about control than about health. It is not the role of the Kentucky Board of Education or the governor or even the CDC to make decisions about my health or the health of my children. It is their role to provide information so that parents can make informed decisions, taking into account our children's individual needs that the KBE doesn't know anything at all about. Because the legislature passed laws limiting the governor's power, he's using an illegally appointed board to keep control, but worse, he's using our children as pawns. If you're for masking, that's great. If you want to mask your children, that's wonderful. You should have the right to do that. I fully support that. But as the gentleman earlier said, for those parents who don't support masking, they feel helpless in this battle. They can't tell their children, practice civil disobedience and don't wear your mask to school, because they're the ones who are going to feel the retribution. And this is not their fight to fight. It's our fight to fight. I plan to talk a little bit about some of the negativities of that masks have on children, but I think that, again, we've seen that already firsthand. We teach children now as young as kindergarten that they live in a world that's unstable, it's full of sickness and death, and that we have this invisible enemy that is so terrifying that we give up our basic rights to our appearance and to freely breathe. Regardless of the ongoing debate about the efficacy of masks and how you feel about mask mandates, this regulation does not meet the criteria for emergency status. Therefore, it should be found deficient, and it should be forced to go through the proper process required by law that provides for adequate vetting of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the speakers for and against in the school mask mandate section. As a chairman, you have to sometimes adjust meetings. So I made a previous announcement about 2 hours. Apparently, we're going to blow right through that. So this room is available. There's no pressure to get out. As chairman of this committee, I'm going to make the decision that I really feel that this is a very, very important topic, and that we will. I've already given wide latitude, but that will continue with the members of this committee. So if we have to go past 2 hours and into 3, we will do so. So having said that, we will now come back to KDE and the board representatives. So you've heard the testimony for and against. As I stated before, I would give you a rebuttal period if you could please proceed, and if you could attempt to keep it within 3 minutes, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the chance to respond. I'll cover some of the statements that were made in opposition to the board's emergency regulation. Regarding the individual rights claims, sometimes attributed to Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, it has been said that my rights to swing end where your nose begins. Expelling viral droplets is an other affecting action. It is not an individual affecting action. It affects others. It's an argument like saying it's an individual right to speed at whatever speed I want on the highway, or I have the right to operate a restaurant and put in place any health and safety precautions I wish when it comes to food preparation. George Washington personally ordered smallpox vaccinations for his troops, even as they were fighting for the War of Independence. The Constitution is not a death pact, and under the 10th Amendment, that leaves decisions regarding public health to the states, which is where this authority for this matter resides. KBE is operating under state law and the authority provided to it in 156.160, which directs the board to promulgate regulations which, quote, are necessary or advisable for the protection and physical welfare of public school children. Certainly based on the advice from public health and medical professionals, the action of KBE is advisable if not necessary. Of note, this authority is separate from the governor's authority under 39A relating to executive orders. The state board is appropriately appointed, confirmed, and empowered to make this regulation. And if someone disagrees with that appointment and authority, then the appropriate place to challenge that is in a court of law. There is a comment period for this regulation, and we have provided appropriate notice for that in accordance with state law. Regarding the point that masks don't work, there are experimental and correlational studies on the effectiveness of masks that show that they are effective. We have referenced those in the documentary evidence that you have. Specific to a study that was conducted by researchers at Duke last year. Pardon me just a moment while I bring that up. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Chair. I've lost my place in that. I'll continue forward. But there was a study conducted on students from Duke that noted, studied over 1 million students in the country. During that time, the researchers noted that during the time of the masking provisions from last school year, more than 7,000 children and adults in North Carolina acquired the coronavirus and attended school while infectious. Because of the close contact with those cases, more than 40,000 people required quarantine. Through contact tracing and testing, however, the authors of the study, Drs. Zimmerman and Benjamin, found that only 363 additional children and adults acquired the coronavirus. Zimmerman and Benjamin conclude, quote, the low rate of transmission occurred because both of the infected person and close contact wore masking. So that is a recent study. It has been said that students and staff are not wearing the mask appropriately. Mask wearing is an effort to reduce the probability of transmission, and it should be used in combination with a set of virus mitigation strategies, several of which have been touched on in the testimony provided today. Also, in a study published just this month comparing the COVID outcomes of several countries in Scientific Reports, notes that Sweden stands out for its greater reliance on voluntary rather than mandatory control measures, and it has among the worst per capita outcomes on COVID-19 mortality in Europe. This is similar to the effect we see here in the United States, where COVID-19 is widespread now, mostly in southeastern states, which for political reasons are relying on an individual preference model when it comes to their public health efforts. Are masks unsafe? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics says face masks can be worn safely by children 2 years of age or older, including the vast majority of children with underlying health conditions, with rare exceptions. Our regulation does provide for some exceptions for students not to wear masks. No one wants to wear a mask any longer than we have to, but the benefits of viral mitigation vastly outweigh the potential risk. That's based on not us at KDE or the Kentucky Board of Education. We're not medical or public health experts, but we rely on the CDC and the Kentucky Department for Public Health for guidance and the teams of epidemiologists and virologists they have on staff. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, Centers for Disease Control, the Kentucky Department of Public Health, and the American Medical Association president has supported the recommendations of the CDC and the AAP. As to whether or not we're considering the long-term impacts, this regulation does consider the long and short-term impacts of the decision and weighing the evidence available to us. It prioritizes the health and safety of students and the preservation of their opportunities for in-person learning as our primary values. What is the end game? When community transmission rates are low and widespread immunity has been achieved and this virus no longer threatens us as a species, I don't know when that might be, but we are clearly not at that point today. The Board of Education, in its motion, directed us to reconvene and reconsider this regulation at such time that we had different guidance from our public health agencies. So we're looking forward to a time when this is behind us. I'd now like to turn things over to Board Chair Young and General Counsel Todd Allen on any points I may have omitted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Dr. Glass, and again, thanks to the committee. I don't have any additional rebuttal except to ask our General Counsel, Mr. Todd Allen, to share with the committee about the emergency regulatory process as it currently exists, including public hearing. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I believe there was a comment regarding the process involved in public hearing. The state board in promulgating and filing this emergency regulation has fully complied with KRS Chapter 13A, which does provide for a public hearing and comment period. And that is published on page 7 of the regulation, where we have indicated the date that we will hold a public hearing, the time we will hold a public hearing, and the comment period.
Thank you. We'll now move into questions from members of the committee. One of the good things about being chairman is I get to start with my own questions. And my questions will be broken down into health concerns and legal concerns. So I'm going to start out with the health concerns. And this is for anybody who wishes to chime in. What are the negative health implications of school-age children wearing masks for 6 to 8 hours at a time? We've had mask mandates here in Kentucky already, but those have generally been for people going into stores and for limited amounts of time. And it appears we're venturing into a new area where the children will be made to wear these for 6 to 8 hours longer periods. So what are those negative health implications?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Again, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, face masks can be safely worn by children 2 to 8 years of age or older, including the vast majority of children with underlying health conditions, with rare exceptions. So we have leading medical organization representing physicians that serve children recommending masks. We also have our own experience this past year where masks were required in Kentucky's public schools. This summer, once we thought masking was behind us and COVID was behind us, we didn't see people come forward with claims that masks had created any short or long-term impacts on students. So those are my responses to your questions.
And I would just add that there will be several times during the school day for younger children and older children when the regulation allows for the mask to be removed, including while they are outdoors. And certainly other times when social distancing can be ensured as well. And that did appear to happen most of last spring in every school district in Kentucky and with satisfactory, in fact, good results. I would also just add a note that your question amplifies the considerations on the part of the state board. We are not medical experts. So when we get those kinds of questions, we immediately turn to trusted medical advisors and the kinds of studies that we've talked about. And it's really important in our process that we hear from folks who, in fact, are able to answer those kinds of important medical questions.
Okay, in your opinion, what are the negative learning and developmental implications of school-age children wearing masks for 6 hours?
I think.
Go ahead, Dr. Young, please.
Pardon me. We did have this conversation at the board meeting, and regarding I heard someone mention this earlier today, the articulation that younger children, when they're learning to read, and those whose first language is not English, when they're learning to speak English, in those cases, there will be times when the mask should, in fact, be removed so that the teacher at an appropriate distance can look at the student's mouth, and oftentimes so that the students can look at the teacher's mouth. So we wanted to provide in the regulation that those kinds of instructional interventions would, in fact, be allowed as long as distancing from the child could be attained.
Just to quickly build on that, Mr. Chair, the regulation does provide for the mask to be removed as one of the exceptions when services are being delivered to the student. And that would be the situation that Chair Young just described.
Is the regulation before us meant to carry out the governor's executive order 2021-585?
This regulation operates under the authority and responsibility granted to the Board of Education under KRS 156.160, which is separate from the governor's authority, and it directs the state board to, again, promulgate regulations necessary or advisable for the protection of the physical welfare and safety of public school children.
Thank you for that answer. The reason I asked that question is under Senate Bill 2, we passed this past session. The governor has a limited amount of time to file a regulation to put into effect an executive order. So if you're saying you're relying totally on 156 and the governor's executive order does not have a regulation along with it, the governor's executive order will collapse. It will be null and void. So just for clarity,
that is not what I'm saying, sir. But we do have our general counsel on who can speak to the separate authority between 39A, which is where the governor's executive authority lies, and 156.160, which is the authority that the state board is relying on for this emergency regulation.
Yeah, thank you, Senator West. I can't speak on behalf of the governor's executive order in this situation, but you are correct in that the authority that the state board relied upon to promulgate this regulation is 156.160. It did not rely upon an emergency or an executive order, as the authority to promulgate the regulation.
Thank you for that clarity, but that is true. What I'm saying is true. If a regulation is not brought forward on the governor's executive order, it will not stand and will be null and void under Senate Bill 2. I'd like to make that point. What are the implications of a school not adhering to the mask mandate?
It really will depend on at what level the lack of adherence to the mandate is occurring. If it's happening with an individual student or group of students, then we've advised districts to rely on their student code of conduct and student discipline procedures to manage that, much as they did this last school year, handling issues with masking or any adherence to masking procedures. If the issue is with an individual employee or group of employees, then school districts have human resources procedures and employee discipline procedures that are progressive in nature to bring their staff into adherence to the regulation. If we're dealing with something more institutional in nature, for example, a school district or a school board or a superintendent or the organization of the school refuse to adhere to the this directive from the Board of Education, we so far have not seen that happen in public school attorneys in the state have, I think, wisely advised their districts, their clients not to do that. There are penalties under the governor's executive order. We have staff from the Cabinet of Family and Human Services here who may speak to the governor's authority and what consequences may be for ignoring the governor's executive order. In our case, the consequences at the institutional level would involve for the educator who is failing to carry out the laws in Kentucky, of which this is has the force of law. There are licensure concerns around that, so it would possibly trigger an investigation by the Education Professional Standards Board into the conduct of the educator, and the EPSB board could then consider potential consequences for that educator. It may result in the Department of Education requesting that a superintendent be removed or a superintendent be stripped of his or her license and ability to operate in a superintendent role in the state of Kentucky, again, for not following the laws in the state. And it may have funding implications, both from a natural consequence standpoint. If we have large scale outbreaks and quarantining that's occurring in schools, if a student is in fact ill, they will be home, and the school district will not be able to count average daily attendance for that student, especially if once they reach the maximum of NTI days that are newly allowable. So there could be natural consequences in terms of poor attendance happening at school. Also, we have another statute that directs the Department of Education to only provide state funds when school districts have complied with state laws and regulations, including regulations put forth by the Kentucky Board of Education. So we hope not to have to use any of these provisions, but they are available to us, and we will review them depending on the circumstances. The final consequence that has been mentioned by some of our speakers is that it potentially creates a liability issue for school districts and their insurance carriers. And so the insurance carriers need to understand if they have a school district that is willfully disregarding a executive order or a emergency regulation which has the force of law in Kentucky designed to protect the health and safety of students.
I think it's also accurate to say, Mr. Allen may correct me, but I think it's also accurate to say that this regulation doesn't have any special provisions for enforcement or consequences. It's the same expectation that we would have of school officials to follow all of the administrative regulations that are promulgated across the Commonwealth.
There is a specific provision in the regulation in Section 2 that requires superintendents to develop and implement procedures within their school districts to ensure that the regulation is complied with.
So that's a very exhaustive and long list of penalties and remedies for KDE and the board. Where I guess I could be missing it, but where are those penalty provisions and any due process provisions found in the regulation?
The regulation relies on other existing penalties and process for not following the laws in the state of Kentucky. So if it's, again, if it's an issue relating to an individual student or individual employee, the school districts have the authority to have student codes of conduct and employee discipline procedures around how they direct and what they ask their students and employees to do. So that would be handled through the policies that are available and within districts.
Where are those penalty provisions referred to? You say they're not in the regulation, but where are they referred to in the regulation?
Those are general provisions that are located within statute related to Kentucky school laws. They apply to all regulations, not just this one. So I think what Commissioner Glass has indicated are general provisions that are set forth in statute that would apply to any regulation promulgated by the state board.
Thank you. So Commissioner Glass, have you personally threatened superintendents with that the committee room will stand at ease and refrain? Have you personally threatened superintendents to withhold school funding if they do not comply with this regulation?
I have not personally threatened a superintendent or a school board that we would withhold funding. However, I have been asked the same question that you're asking me now and provided the same response, that there are consequences to ignoring the laws in Kentucky, and this is what they are. In these cases, we will have to evaluate the circumstances and decide what the appropriate action might be. It would include the due process that you mentioned, whether it be at an institutional level or a licensure issue. would involve due process with the Educational Professional Standards Board, recommendations that we might make to the Attorney General on the removal of school board members, recommendations to a school board on the removal of a superintendent, or a process to notice and then allow a district to respond to allegations that they're not following the laws or the regulations of the Board of Education on the funding question.
So how can a school board or superintendent look at this regulation on its face and determine if I have a student that's not wearing a mask, if I have a group of students not wearing a mask, what are the penalties? It appears to me that if there's an infraction and KDE finds out about it, it's a case-by-case basis, ad hoc. We'll decide after the fact what happens to each individual district. And doesn't that set up a case where you could have wide variation in penalties as it applies to different districts? Shouldn't there be a uniformity to penalties?
As is the case with many state laws, the facts of the individual circumstances dictate and create an it depends situation on what should happen next. Again, as we have a situation where it's an individual student, small group of students, or an individual educator or a small group of employees, though there are provisions within Code of Conduct and the employee discipline procedures to handle that. If we're dealing with something institutional, for example, a Board of Education or a school superintendent passed a regulation locally that prohibited the enforcement of state law, or a superintendent directed staff not to adhere to state law, then we're dealing with a different circumstance. So I think directly to your question, we have to look at the circumstances and decide what the appropriate course forward is. So far, we've not had to do that.
This is my last question, then I'll shift to other members. A year ago, the Board of Education determined that it was unsafe for children to attend school for in-person learning. And we went to the hybrid model. So today, we have a recent spike in COVID cases. And many of those cases, as was stated earlier, are affecting younger people. So today, this past week, the board has determined it's safe now for children to be in school, and that wearing a mask will make up the difference. So, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, it seems a lot more dangerous this year to have in-person learning than last year. What's the main difference between this year and last year? Is it the masks? Is the mask going to make up the difference, or is there something else?
Thank you, Senator. I started in this role last September, but I do not believe it is the case that the Kentucky Board of Education promulgated any regulations directing school models in person out or out of school remote models for school districts. So I don't think that is the case. What we do know is that we have a year of our lived experience with COVID now and operating schools. And we've learned a lot about how we can operate schools safely and what is effective. Masks are part of a layered COVID mitigation strategy that Kentucky schools have proven were effective this last year. We also rely on the public health guidance of the Centers for Disease Control, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association that has supported that, and in our own Kentucky Department of Public Health, also recommending these layered mitigation strategies that include masking. So what is different from last year is that we know more, and that what we know is based on our experiences and the science, and that is exactly what the Board of Education is using to as the rationale for moving forward with this emergency regulation.
And we would also agree, and I would reiterate that we do believe that in-person learning in safe school environments is the priority for returning to school this fall. So everything that we can do to support ensuring that kids are in fact able to be in school in person and not have to be consistently interrupted through quarantining. The priority of the board was to ensure getting kids into school and keeping them there.
So one last question. So we had masks last year. So why didn't the board conclude that last year? Because of our new knowledge about COVID? Is that what you're saying?
We had what last year, Senator?
We had masks available last year. So why didn't the school board make that decision last year to have in-person instruction with masks?
We knew less. We were relying on provisions around using social distancing as a more prominent strategy. So when you require 6 feet of social distancing, just using the square footage that's available in most classrooms, you can't fit all of the students in and create a 6-foot bubble around students. We learned as COVID moved forward, again, both on our own experience and the experience of school systems operating in the United States and internationally, that with masking and the other procedures, it's possible to relax the social distancing element so long as you have these other procedures in place and continue forward with in-person learning. So again, we've learned from our own experience, and we've learned from the studies of having lived through COVID this past year.
Thank you. Co-Chair Hale.
Thank you, Chair West. Thank you very much. And let me just begin by saying thank you, Commissioner Glass, for being with us today, and Ms. Young, we do appreciate your time today. I know there's a lot of questions from probably several of the members, and we want to be very cognizant of everybody's time, and I'm sure that some of these questions are going to be some of us have some of the same questions, so I just want to say to the members, if you have a question that's already been asked, please refrain from that same question if possible. But I want to start out, again, my co-chair, Senator West, and myself, we were informed of this meeting a few days ago, and we have been preparing information, asking whoever wanted to come and speak on either for or against, and give everyone ample time to do that. And I think that I think Co-Chair West has done a great job in that today of giving everyone the opportunity to speak. And I know several of the members have questions, but I just have a couple or three, and I'll try not to be repetitive of what's already been asked. But Commissioner Glass, this question is to you, sir. From my understanding, and if I quote something wrong, feel free to correct me, but the Superintendent's Advisory Council apparently made a recommendation last week to table this emergency regulation. And my question is, why did the board decide not to at least honor that recommendation, to at least table that instead of moving forward, disregarding their recommendation?
Thank you for the question. We did hold, as required by statute, when it comes to Kentucky Board of Education regulations, a local superintendent advisory committee meeting where we gain input from a group of superintendents on any regulations that the board considers. Through the course of that group made two recommendations to the board. One is that they table the decision to impose a statewide mask mandate. The second is that we work with the Kentucky Department of Public Health to consider a more localized model. So something that would take into account, for example, positivity rates and vaccination rates possibly, and a more localized model where we could have different masking requirements or other COVID mitigation strategies that were put in place across districts. That information was communicated to the state board. They did hear it and considered it as part of their deliberation. For the board, and I'll let Madam Chair Young speak to on behalf of her board members, but it's my impression that the board members relied again upon the directive to them under 156.160, which is to promulgate regulations necessary or advisable to protect the health and safety of public school children in Kentucky. They also considered that based on where we are right now, we don't have a localized issue. If we look at the incidence rate map that the Department of Public Health publishes, we have only 6 counties that are in the orange category, and every other county is in the red category. So this is a virus that that doesn't care about political boundaries or county lines. And we have a number of counties where employees and parents are crossing county lines. So this is not something that is a individualized or localized issue. It is a statewide issue, is a public health issue, is a national issue, and because of the nature of a pandemic, it's a global issue. So Madam Chair Young, I'll also turn to you for any responses you may have.
Certainly, and I concur with Dr. Glass's response, and would just add that as a retired Kentucky school superintendent, I tune into as many LSAC meetings as I can, and I was able to view the meeting that day and hear from my colleague superintendents on the issue. We did hear them, and we did take their recommendations under consideration, as Dr. Glass just explained. But I would add that the pervasive consideration at the board meeting last week was that the situation was too dire under the Delta variant and the numbers that were beginning to climb in the surge. We didn't feel that we had the luxury with the kind of the rolling opening of schools across Kentucky over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks. We didn't feel that we had the latitude to be able to wait before so many schools started.
Just one final quick point. Thank you for your patience as we work to respond to these. I did act upon the second recommendation that came from the LSAC and reached out to the Department of Public Health to inquire about the development of a localized approach. So right now it wouldn't matter a lot. Again, we have all but 6 of our counties in Kentucky that are above that 25 incidences per 100,000 level. That puts them all in the red. But it is something that we're working on with them. And again, as the state board passed in the motion related to this regulation, if the Department of Public Health were to change guidance toward a more localized approach, it would immediately trigger the state board to come back together and reconsider this regulation.
So let me just follow up on that. You stated that they were engaged in the conversation, but then you just went forward and said apparently their concerns or their ideas was not adhered to or listened to. So what was their response? Did they have a response as to why you went forward with this particular avenue that you went down instead of listening to their what they locally felt was the best for them? What was the response from them to you on that? Or were they given a chance to respond?
I did not hear any responses from any of the LSEC members following the meeting. So I don't know what their response to it is. The LSAC is an advisory committee to the board. So its purpose is to provide their advice and recommendations to the board. The board, in good faith and in accordance with the law, heard those recommendations, considered them, and ultimately took the action that they took.
Well, I want to ask another question then. Does the state school board and yourself, sir, not trust the decisions of our local school superintendents and their boards?
I have tremendous respect, having been a former superintendent, for the decisions that happen locally, and respect and believe that local decision making on most issues is appropriate. But you're not dealing again with a localized issue; you're dealing with a statewide issue, and it's important to note that just as we are here today in this emergency call meeting as evidence of it, there are factors other than the public health and considerations of students and the preservation of their opportunities for in-person learning that are at play. There are political pressures that school boards are operating under, and therefore, again, referring back to the language and the direction that the Kentucky Board of Education has under 156160, they are to promulgate regulations that are necessary or advisable to protect the public health of students. And so that is what they have done. So while in many cases, deference to local decision-making is something that should be adhered to, when it comes to issues of public safety and the safety of our children, it is something that we have to consider acting together as. It's the same reason that you don't have localized regulations that come to this health and safety in restaurants. One community, you should be able to go in and get something to eat in one community or the next and expect a standard when it comes to health and safety. And if you travel on streets and roads and highways in the state of Kentucky, you should expect a standard of safety to be present and not change from one community to the next. So again, based on the circumstances that we're presently facing, I support the Board of Education's decision and think it was in accordance with the statute that they're operating under.
Co-Chairman Hale, if you would pause for a
Mr.
moment.
Chair, I would just add that I heard from superintendents who reached out to me privately that appreciated the mandate, and in fact, some before the mandate was even issued, because it gave them additional support for making these hard decisions in their communities as well, some of whom were on LSAC.
Thank you, Co-Chairman Hale. If you would pause for a moment. I would ask, Chairman, that everyone in the audience refrain from outbursts. I know this is a passionate issue, have a lot of passion surrounding it, but if you could refrain from outbursts so everyone can hear the testimony. Thank you.
And I have one final question, because I know that give all the members time to ask their questions, and I may have a couple at the end, but I just want to end with this question here. This emergency regulation that came from your association was for 270 days. This emergency regulation was given out as a 270-day regulation. Do you foresee that being necessary for the entire period of this school year? And if not, what will you do about that?
Thank you very much for the question. We certainly hope not. We do not wish to have, none of us want to be living under the threat of COVID and carrying on with these mitigation steps any longer than we absolutely have to. The reason for the 270-day provision that's in the board's regulation relates to the statute on emergency regulations and the regulatory process in the state, which stipulates that emergency regulations are for 270 days. That is for the reason that that's the amount of time that it takes for a regular regulation to pass that would supersede the emergency regulation. The Board of Education in this case, in their motion to put this emergency regulation into effect, also stipulated that if there are adjustments based on the CDC or our Kentucky Department of Public Health around masking guidelines or other public health, school safety guidelines, that would immediately trigger the board coming back together to reconsider this regulation. So they built into their motion a trigger effect to bring them back in to reconsider it. General Counsel Allen, I don't know if there's anything you wish to add on that, but in short, that's why the 270 days is there, and we sure hope that it is not the case that we're all living with this for the next year.
Representative Hale, I would just add that KRS 13A does have a provision for filing a letter withdrawing the emergency regulation upon the state board coming back into session and taking action to withdraw the regulation. We can file that letter immediately with the regulations compiler. And as I understand KRS 13A, at that point in time, the regulation would no longer be effective.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Chairman, we have 3 other House members on this committee that have questions, but I'll yield back to you at this point, and then we will proceed.
Thank you, Co-Chair Hale. Being in the Senate, I'm somewhat biased, so I'm going to go over to Senator Alvarado now. He's next in line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. I've got a lot of questions and commentary, and based on everything that I've heard, we've heard a lot of testimony from a lot of individuals. First and foremost, let's get something. I want to get something on the table. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. I understand the science behind all the things that we're talking about. When you start talking about COVID ending, COVID is never going to end. Let's make that clear. COVID is here to stay. COVID has been around. Coronaviruses have been around a long time. They've been around for decades. So COVID's not going away. COVID's going to be here. Just like influenza was around in 1918 with a massive pandemic, influenza's still around. We're going to be seeing COVID every year. So the question just becomes, as we get new strains, are we going to start having these types of fears in our schools and kind of not listening to our local officials? George Washington, I would remind the commissioner, was an elected leader. He was not a bureaucrat who was appointed. And I would remind you, Commissioner, that you and the entire Board of Education are not elected individuals in our Commonwealth. our local school boards are elected by people locally. So we're talking about having mandates, whether it be for anything for that matter, it should be by elected individuals and not by bureaucrats. This reminds me of, if you've seen the Peanuts cartoon, of Lucy putting the football down and Charlie Brown coming to kick it, and the football gets pulled away at the last second and Charlie Brown falls down. This happened last year when the promise came from the governor's office and from lots of individuals about what our local school boards could do in terms of having people back in schools, and it was yanked out at the last second saying, nope, I'm going to do it myself. Here we are again. A promise was made by this governor and by the Board of Education seemingly as well, going forward to all of our superintendents in our school board saying, you guys go ahead and make decisions for your local issues about getting back to school and what your requirements are going to be. And a lot of man hours were put into that by our superintendents and by our school boards and by teachers and by parents, only to at the last second say, nope, don't like the direction you're going, we're going to do it ourselves. My first question for you all, do you think that the parents of Kentucky love their children? Say yes or no.
Yes.
Do you think that the superintendents care about the well-being of their students in their school districts and want the best outcomes for them?
Yes.
Do you think our school board members want the same thing, best outcomes for our kids and want them healthy and in school?
Yes.
Do you think our teachers that teach in our schools want the same thing as well, Commissioner?
Yes.
Do you think that you love our kids more than the parents of Kentucky love their kids?
I don't think it's an either or question.
Oh, well, do you?
I love our kids as much as any parent and public servant and educator.
You're telling me you love my kids as much as I love my children?
I care for the well-being of your students.
Yeah, but it's a yes or no. Do you love I have 2 kids. Do you love my kids more than I love my kids?
Please, Senator.
Please, Commissioner. Because I'll tell you why I ask those questions. We all know what the response needs to be. Is that there's basically your actions speak louder than your words. When you said we want to give people local control and all these things, you don't want to give local control on these issues. And these decisions have to be made by local officials who are elected, who have the best interests. None of us want to see our children harmed. No parent I know of wants to see their kids have bad outcomes and have bad health and have bad outcomes and be in a hospital or be sick. Nobody. We've heard from parents here today who don't want to see that happen. The fact of the matter is you all don't trust the people underneath you to make those decisions because you think that you know better. And this governor thinks that he knows better. I've heard testimony today about asking for help. This is the first time anybody has asked for our help on these issues and rolling out. Definitely not from the governor's office. I think there's one board-certified pediatrician on this campus here at the state capitol, and I've gotten 0 requests for help, 0 requests for input at all. And I've got some training in this field. So my question is also why are we not asking for the input of our superintendents, our local school boards? There's a reason why superintendents are not here today. You're saying that you have people that like what you did. Why are they not here today testifying? They could have come in through Zoom. The reason why a lot of superintendents are not here today is for fear of retribution, frankly, from the board. And from you, Commissioner, they're fearful. They're scared they're going to get funding cut if they speak out against this because they don't have the same opinion as you have. And that's not a good reputation to have, Commissioner. You're fairly new at this job. And for this board, who I didn't vote for a single one for their appointment, I'll have everybody know, I'm gladly on the record for that. People are fearful of retribution. That's what our school system is right now. Teachers don't speak up for fear of retribution for their jobs. Superintendents and school boards are not speaking up on this issue for fear of that as well. Here's my next question. I mean, the issue on this is 2 things for me. It's process and policy. So I've advocated for people using masks when we've had higher numbers. I'm not opposed to using masks. It is a line of defense. Someone earlier said it's the only one. There are multiple lines of defense. And so I guess my questions, I'm going to start with a series of questions here, Commissioner. Why are we using CDC guidelines as the method for the backing of this? You mentioned you're using CDC guidelines. Why are we using that?
Well, as I mentioned, Senator, at the Kentucky Department of Education, we're not medical experts, so we rely on the medical expertise and the public health expertise of organizations like the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and our own Kentucky Department of Public Health. I think the distinction, you're quite right that this virus will persist with us. The distinction is it is a novel coronavirus. And you as a medical professional understand that means that there is very little to no natural immunity that exists, which is why it's more serious than something like influenza or other diseases that have been infecting humanity for some time.
So I'll quote an individual who had something to say about CDC guidelines in our state. And this is the quote. The CDC guidelines are not meant to be prescriptive or interpreted as standards that can be regulated. And also another comment, not only are CDC guidelines not written for or intended to be written into law, they can be contradictory, vague, and in some instances more restrictive than current state rules. Do you know who said that, Commissioner?
I do not.
That was Governor Beshear when he issued a veto message on House Bill 1 this past year. That's from our own governor, as far as his interpretation of CDC guidelines. I'm also going to ask you, I mean, lots of the world has had a lot of experience in terms of fighting this Delta variant that's been coming out in terms of COVID-19. I'd say that other states probably have more experience than we do at this point. Would you agree with that?
Agree with
other countries, rather. Other countries have more experience in terms of dealing with Delta variant than the United States has so far.
some.
Some have. So there is an organization called the World Health Organization, and this goes as to the policy of what's actually within this, because you're advocating for children down to the age of 2. And as a pediatrician, I could understand, I probably could justify junior high and high school kids, and I can understand some of that. But my issues with children in elementary school and down to the age of 2, because as a pediatrician, we know that a lot of kids at that age are requiring the visualization of people's faces. There's lots of developmental issues that go on, language development, that sort of thing. The World Health Organization has issued recommendations on should children wear a mask. And the World Health Organization, again, lots of international physicians, medical experts, epidemiologists, virologists, people that have studied this, and also from UNICEF, which is the United Nations Children Fund. And this is what it says. World Health Organization advises that people, this is from their website, anybody can look it up, advises that people should always consult and abide by local authorities on recommended practices in their area. An international and multidisciplinary expert group brought together by the World Health Organization reviewed evidence on COVID-19 disease and transmission in children and the limited available evidence on the use of masks by children. Based on this and other factors such as children's psychosocial needs and developmental milestones, WHO and UNICEF advise the following. Children aged 5 years and under should not be required to wear masks. This is based on the safety and overall interest of the child and the capacity to appropriately use a mask with minimal assistance. And also the World Health Organization and UNICEF advise that the decision to use masks for children ages 6 through 11 should be based on the following factors. And they go through several things, including widespread transmission in the area, ability of the child to appropriately use a mask, access to clean masks, adult supervision, and the potential impact of wearing a mask on learning and psychosocial development in consultation with teachers, parents, and or medical providers. That's from the World Health Organization, who's got a lot of experience in overseeing this in lots of other countries, because we're not the only country dealing with this. The problems we're having here are not unique to America or to Kentucky. And I would recommend that perhaps we go beyond just what the CDC tells us, because the governor doesn't think the CDC can be reliable on all things. He's actually come out, I think he had an article not that long ago when they changed the testing guidance. He said we should ignore the CDC recommendations. And he's come out and said we shouldn't be using them to create and draft law, which is what the Board of Education has done and you have advocated for. I would argue that these are kind of the things we should be deciding on a local level. We've heard some testimony from students today. Most of them I can't notice but help. They're from big cities and not from the country. We've got folks that live in cities, and maybe what applies to Jefferson County and to Fayette County is going to be different than what applies for Trigg County or for Adair County or any county that's got a rural base of individuals. And I would ask those students who came to testify, have you spoken to the 3- and 4-year-olds in our schools about how they feel about this? Have you been to other counties to visit how they handle things there? Because it might be different than how you handle things in those counties as well. Here's the other thing too. I know the Duke study was commented on. That has no control arm, by the way, Commissioner, in that study. The other thing also I think is we talk about kids who are immunodeficient. We have influenza outbreaks in our schools every year. And to date, more kids have died from influenza in 1 year than COVID. We don't want kids catching COVID. This is a nasty variant. For those who have not been vaccinated, I would urge you, go get vaccinated, because we're going to get out from underneath this by vaccination. But for those who, I'm going to ask you something as well, Commissioner, I think is important. How many of our teachers have been vaccinated so far in our school system? So I think vaccination is going to be the key to get out from underneath it, not masks. How many of our teachers have been vaccinated?
I don't know the answer to that, Senator, but I applaud your calls for a larger scale vaccination.
Yeah. Well, so if you don't know that answer, we know that the governor has been urging a lot of our hospitals and medical professionals to go out and to require those employers for people to be to have mandated vaccinations? Is the board, or are you considering requiring that of our teachers as well, or from all the people that work in our school systems?
We're not currently considering that, and we have General Counsel Allen on. I'm not sure it's even legal in Kentucky any longer.
Very good. I've taken up enough time, Mr. Chairman. I think you can understand. I mean, the issue is, like I said, I don't disagree with masking. It's a decision that should not be made at your level, not by bureaucrats. We have local elected officials who have spent a lot of time. And every time this governor and this board has said, we're going to let you make that decision, at the last second, you pull the football away and you let them fall flat. And if you want to know why you're not being effective, or anyone's being affected in the governor's office, or in terms of getting people to get vaccinated, frankly, it's a matter of trust anymore. Is that when you give people that opportunity, you tell them you're going to do something and then you don't follow through on your word, it gets pretty tough to have people have trust in what they're being told. And I would encourage you to take this back. I mean, we have lots of infectious diseases that are out there, including influenza, including hepatitis A, that a common cold, that an immunocompromised individual, whether it be an adult or a kid, it can kill them. We don't have these same kind of measures when influenza rolls out. And I would urge you that this needs to be rolled back. One of the issues I'd like to see is that the age be rolled back. Kids from ages 2 to 5 should not be required to mask, at least not according to international experts on this issue who don't recommend it. And ages 6 to 11 probably should be decided at least at the local level at the very least. But this is inadequate. This is deficient in my mind. This is something that should be decided at the local level by local school boards to trust those individuals who you've acknowledged love their kids and want to see the best outcomes for them. Because what you're saying to them is that you don't that you think you love their kids more than they do. And that's not the case here in Kentucky. We love our children. We want good outcomes for our kids. Our parents, our school board members, our teachers, our superintendents work very, very hard to make sure that happens. And I would urge you to remove this and let them make those decisions there locally at home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Marzian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't had this much controversy for a while. But before I get started, I want to wish Senator Alice Forgy-Kerr a happy birthday. We're in the same, we're a month apart, so we always have to tell each other happy birthday, and I'm hoping she's recovering from her COVID. And welcome, Senator Alvarado. So the one, I wanted to just respond very quickly and make a couple comments, but you're wondering why we're following CDC guidelines. I believe we did pass a bill that said Kentucky's COVID response should match the CDC guidelines. And the CD guidelines says universal indoor masking by all students ages 2 or older. So we did pass that in House Bill 1, and I guess that's the reason we're following it. But this does raise a lot of issues and concerns, I'm sure, among folks. I've gotten a lot of emails about vaccines and masks. And I'm a supporter of science. I'm a supporter of data. I'm a 38-year nurse, worked in ICU. So it's really concerning that something that is, to me, so simple. My 10-year-old won't leave the house without his 10-year-old grandson, and my 95-year-old mother-in-law is the same, because we don't want to see him in the hospital on ventilators. And my medical professional friends that work in hospitals are angry, they're frustrated, they've had it, they're leaving, simply because people will not get vaccinated, they won't wear their masks, and they end up in the ER. One patient that my friend took care of sat in the ER for 3 days, could not get a bed in intensive care because it was full of COVID patients, unvaccinated COVID patients, non-mask wearing COVID patients. They're tired of it. We're going to lose hospitals because who's paying for this? If you're on Medicare, Medicaid, socialized medicine, we would call that, the taxpayers are paying for that. If you have health insurance, we're all going to pay for that with increased premiums. So some people are calling me saying, if you don't get vaccinated, if you don't wear a mask, you should have to pay for your own hospitalization. And maybe if we put that into place, people might comply. if you had to pay for your own irresponsibility, your own liberty, then the bottom line is always about money. I see you shaking your heads, but if you had to pay for it yourself, I bet you'd get the shot. I'm speaking. I'm sorry.
Hold up, Representative Marzian. Members of the audience, Representative Marzian has the floor. Please be quiet while she is asking a question or commenting.
So my friends in healthcare are frustrated. The rural hospitals are going to close. In fact, there was one closing in Northern or King's Daughters. I can't remember which one last year. They're not going to be able to handle this overflow of COVID patients that are going to be on ventilators and going to be sick for a long time with we do not know what further implications. And it's very interesting to hear about my body, my choice, since when it comes to my uterus, the General Assembly is happy to enact legislation to say you are forced to carry an unintended pregnancy to term. So we can't pick and choose. I'm talking about my body, my choice, which is the stack of emails I've gotten, personal, private choices.
Representative Bridges, I'm going to let Representative Marzian have wide latitude. I've let others have wide latitude, so I'm going to apply the same to her. Thank you.
So I'd like to wish that all of you here that are so concerned about mental health of children having to wear a mask would be just as concerned about children that are subjected to domestic violence and child abuse, since we are number one in the country in domestic violence and child abuse, but we don't seem to care about that. I guess I'm finished for now. I do have questions of the Board of Education, or I guess I have comments to the Board of Education, and I want to say thank you from my district, thank you from my school superintendents, thank you for my daughter and my son-in-law who teach in public schools, and my grandchildren who attend public schools and are happy to wear their mask and have not been scarred for life. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. First of all, to all those that have come and spoke today, thank you for taking the time and addressing the committee. And thank you for purposes of getting some information. A lot of us committee members obviously have read this, been advised this ever-changing virus and how we respond to it. But here in the open discussion, definitely bring some things to light. One thing that I like to always bring out is that despite our own individual backgrounds, we are none of us stand as the top experts on this. In fact, we've looked throughout the world to see what the top experts are, and I think on a pandemic like this, we need to continue to look at that. Thank you, Senator Alvarado, for bringing up about who. I think that absolutely we need to be looking at it. The CDC guidelines that we put in place, we passed a legislation saying that Kentucky's COVID response should match the CDC. I actually spoke against that because I was concerned that we were losing control. That passed through the House and Senate. The governor vetoed it, and then it was overturned. So I think it's what we're left with. We're looking at the CDC guidelines as kind of the response of what's best. As far as the board here looking at it, I believe it's a bipartisan board, and Mr. Glass, you may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was the put forward was unanimous to say that there was going to be a requirement for the mask mandate. Was that a unanimous decision?
That is correct, and based on the statute enacted in the last legislative session, the board's composition is changing as members roll off to reflect the gender, demographic, regional, and partisan makeup of the state. So, for example, we have recently had a board member in Eastern Kentucky that has resigned, and that position will have to be replaced by a male Republican from that same region.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think what we get into, because this is so personal to all of us, I have 2 school-age children attending public education, and Neither one of them like to wear the mask, not happy about it, but understand, I think by virtue of being brought into politics so much, they understand. They've heard in passing some of the committees and been brought around. They know the necessity for that, in not being the ultimate saving grace, but just being a mitigating factor. And if we know it's a mitigating factor, then shouldn't we be doing everything in our ability to be able to make sure that kids are in school? Last year, I wasn't real popular when I said kids have to be back in school. We've got to get kids back in school. Some people in my district are saying, no, they shouldn't. It's dangerous. We need to get them in school. And we were, I was saying, what possible ways what do we have to do to make them back in school? Now we have them back in school. We want to make sure they stay in school. We know that there's a lot of other issues that come with them being homeschooled, but not the distance learning, besides just falling behind. But also the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce has also passed and come out and said that they're in support of the mask requirement from economic reasons. A lot of us, we forget, Kentucky, we're a poor state, and we struggle. And when moms and dads are at home with their children, when moms and dads can't go to work, then we continue to slow down. So I know the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce kind of expressed their support for the mask mandate, the requirement for economic reasons. And so I think all those have to come in place. But finally, I just want to point out right now, we're a lot of talking heads for this committee. And I've learned that it's humbling since I've been fairly still new to the Senate. A lot of what we do, it's, we'll make political points, we'll say how we feel, what we do. But at this point, there won't be anything that can be done. So a lot of times we'll hope by the time we get into session, that maybe this ever-changing requirement maybe will be somewhere different. Maybe we'll be there. I'm all for the fact-finding, but for the general public who are sending messages going, vote this way, don't vote that way, I applaud the chair, the committee, for using this as a fact-finding to making sure we're educating the general public. But I do want to make sure that the general public does understand that this committee doesn't have that ability today to do one or the other. And thank you for the time, and thank you for each of you that spoke.
Thank you, Senator Yates. Senator Alvarado.
Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Chairman, that in House Bill 1, I'm looking over the details here, it gives the option for local communities, businesses, that sort of thing, to make those decisions in terms of whether or not they follow CDC guidelines or not. And so that's where it comes down to. It didn't mandate it. It just said this is the option you have either from government or from CDC is how it's written out in that bill.
Thank you. Representative Frazier. Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard some phrases used today, and I'll just be honest with you, I have to question those. Dr. Glass, in your opening statements, you said people working in the schools know best. Another phrase is in good faith. Before I get started here, will you tell me who appointed you to your position and your committee members to your position so that we can verify whether Ms. Cohen was correct or not in her statement?
To make sure the record is correct, I believe that I said the people in our schools and working and learning in them know what to do when it relates to COVID mitigation strategies and how to put in place these masking requirements and follow through on them to keep our schools safe. So that is the context, and we can go back and look at the record or the statement if that's necessary. Directly to your second question, I was appointed by this State Board of Education. They were appointed by Governor Beshear and confirmed by the Senate.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify that a little background on this is that this was the first governor in modern history to do that, to clear out the board and make their own appointments. So when I hear statements of good faith and locals know best, and go back to the Superintendent's Advisory Committee, they're asked to come in and give their advice. With the locals know best, in the board meeting in Frankfort, I would feel like the local superintendents know best, more so than appointed members of a board in other places that are not directly working day in and day out directly with these students, with these teachers in these districts and in these counties. So I really have to question whether some of these actions are the true intent of the board, or if they're just another extension of the governor's sweeping out arm of overstepping his boundaries. I have to question that. I've had numbers of people call me, even numbers of superintendents that ask me, please don't mention my name. I fear of retribution. We've heard about fear, how people operate in fear, the anxiety it brings about when you live in fear. And we have our superintendents of this state, and not just superintendents from West Kentucky, from all over this state, that fear that they can't speak up because they've already shared their thoughts through their advisory board, and yet they were muted. They went unheard. They were not considered. And then when I look at these guidelines, we've got all kinds of things about who can wear a mask, who can't wear a mask, when something that's been stated time and time again that hand washing is more important than wearing a mask. And there's not one directive in here about how to wash your hands, when to wash your hands, anything about washing your hands. You know, this is not the only thing. And then we have to look at the concerns. The statement was baseless concerns. Something ultimately at stake that is the foundation of this country and is the foundation of Kentucky is freedom. That's not a baseless argument. It's important, and we have to honor that. We are commanded to honor that in our Constitution. So, I just have to question whether the sincerity of the board's actions are for the health of the children, or whether it could be the directions of a higher power that oversees them. It concerns me greatly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to wait for somebody to answer the phone. Okay. If you're on Zoom, if you would please mute your sound.
Mr. Chair, on the last set of questions, was there a question that you'd like me to respond to, or was that a statement that the member was making?
I'll leave that up to Representative Bridges. Did you have a specific question, Representative?
No, that was just a statement of observation and concern on my. Okay. I don't know if we're to a point of making motions or not.
Almost there. Okay. Thank you. At this point, are there any other questions from members? Seeing none, I got a couple more here and we'll be wrapped up on this section. Just for point of clarification, this could be KDE, board, or council. I did hear some conflicting testimony. This reg being brought forward, once again, is not connected to the governor's executive order. Is that true? You're totally relying on KRS 156. Is that true?
That's correct. The Kentucky Board of Education, as it was restructured under KARA, operates as a separate entity from the governor. I don't report directly to the governor either, and the authority that the Board of Education operated under with this regulation is separate from the governor's authority to enact executive orders. I'd also underscore the importance of separation of powers that's enshrined in our Constitution, and that the legislature has set forth the statutes on how the board is to operate and how, under what authority this regulation was put forth, in the process by which it was put forth. And under that authority and following the process set forth by the legislature, we as the executive agency have taken appropriate action.
Thank you. At this time, as the chairman, I'd like to make a statement, and this statement is more for the general public. There's been a lot of confusion I've noticed on Facebook and Twitter about how this committee operates. This committee cannot strike down a regulation. We do not have that power. Generally, the way this committee works, it's under 13A, KRS 13A. There are basically three options that are put before us. We can ask an agency or cabinet to withdraw a regulation. We can ask them to defer. If they choose to defer, that just flows into the next monthly meeting, and they can defer numerous times. This committee meets once a month. It's unlike any other committee in Frankfort. The third option of this committee is to find a reg deficient. And if we vote to find a reg deficient, that does not mean that the governor, through his executive authority, cannot still enact or allow that regulation to move forward. That is his discretion. What the committee does do by finding a reg deficient is it marks the reg for the legislature. So this past session, I filed a bill at the beginning of session, and all deficient regs were on that list, and we passed the statute that meant those regs were null and void. So that's how this committee operates. If a reg is found deficient, that does not mean that the reg does not move forward. However, it does send a message of the intent of the legislature. So I want to get that public service announcement out of the way, and just for clarity for everyone. Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, at this time I would open the floor for any motions that any member deems appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we find this regulation deficient.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor to find this regulation deficient from Senator Alvarado. We have a second from Representative Bridges on this motion. I'm going to ask at this time, the committee will stand at ease. At this time, as a matter of courtesy, I would ask a question of KDE, really the school board. If after hearing all the testimony here today, that you would wish to withdraw this regulation.
On behalf of the department, we do not wish to withdraw. I'll defer to Madam Chair for speaking on behalf of the board.
And on behalf of the Kentucky Board of Education, we do not wish to withdraw. Thank you.
Thank you. We have on the floor before us a motion, and we have a valid second. At this time, we will hear discussion on the motion for deficiency. Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just for the record, I'm not opposed to using masks. I support vaccinations, urge everyone to get vaccinated. The Kentucky Department, I don't think really the Board of Education has the authority for this. This should be made at a local level. And my biggest issue with this also is that children down to the age of 2, I don't think is appropriate. I think ages 2 to 5, again, the World Health Organization is pretty clear. A lot of experts have reviewed a lot of data on COVID-19 around the world and don't recommend that kids down to that age be required. I think, frankly, it's easier to potty train a 2-year-old in a month than it would be to keep a mask on a 2-year-old child with all the risks that come with that as well. So because of those issues, that's the reason why I've made my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Co-Chair Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would add, as to what Senator Alvarado just stated, I certainly believe that I'm not anti-mask. I encourage people that want to wear a mask to do that, do it properly, do it correctly. I'm certainly not anti-vaccination. I believe that is one of the things that we need to promote to get through this and to beat this. But again, that's a personal choice that each individual has to make. I also believe that the local school boards, our local superintendents, and those that, the school boards especially, that were elected into those positions are the ones that we need to be listening to locally, all across our 174 or 5 districts, whatever we have in Kentucky. They are the ones, in my view, that needs to be making that choice or that decision, and not the unelected board here in Frankfort that was appointed by Governor Beshear. And so I believe that we need to go back to our local boards, and if they so choose that, so be that. We will live that we will live with that decision in our own local school districts. So I believe that was taken away from them. I do not believe they may have been consulted, and I'm sure they were consulted. But as Representative Bridges stated, and Senator Alvarado stated as well, I think many of those individuals are in total disagreement with this, and they are they're at fear of what might be the retribution to them if they speak out upon that. So thank you, Senator West, for letting me make that statement.
You're welcome. Any other comments? Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to reiterate the comments that we've heard here today, that, either we have a representative form of government with locally elected officials that have the power to act, that are closest to the people, or we do not. We cannot have it both ways and choose and decide when and where we're going to adhere to that. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Representative Bridges.
I just want to explain my second and share one more concern I failed to share earlier. One thing in these guidelines that I think fail us is that there are no guidelines. There are no metrics as far as at what point do positivity rates decline that we remove the mask. There's no guidelines whatsoever. I would suggest to the board that they put in a policy and guidelines that the local school superintendent should follow, that has numbers that you can follow, that would say if your positivity rates goes to a certain, you have to require mask. This was, our transmission and everything was related to going to a restaurant. Our students do not go from school to school to school, and the numbers we show account for any variance that was mentioned today. So, I think this is a deficient regulation, and I would urge the board to go back and put some metrics and guidelines, definitions into what the superintendents can look to for guidance, and then allow them that local control to make that decision. Fulton County is in the yellow zone right now. McCracken County is in the red zone. So even that close, you can't regulate that, and I can't say enough that freedom is not a baseless argument. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any other discussion from members? I have a few quick comments. This committee is about the rule of law and due process. And this committee is kind of the last line before a regulation goes into effect. And it's important to point out that the Constitution and the rule of law applies even during times of pandemic. Matter of fact, it applies even more so. This regulation, normally when we have regulations come before this committee, those regulations are meant to carry out valid KRS statutes that have been passed by the legislature. That is not the case in this situation. We have a reg before us that's sole basis is KRS 156. This reg, if it moves forward, it will become law. It will not have passed a House committee. It will not pass the House floor. It will not have passed the Senate committee. It will not have passed the Senate floor. There would be no due diligence. Because of that, this reg should be held to a higher standard. It is held to a higher standard. The biggest problem I have with the regulation, and the reason I advocate for deficiency, is the due process and penalty provisions. There are no due process and penalty provisions in this regulation for noncompliance. Since school boards and superintendents are not being allowed to make their own decisions, a new law should reflect clearly what penalties will be in place if a school district does not comply. If this moves forward, the KDE in effect will be making the rules up as they go. What's worse is they'll be making the penalties up as they go. The reg is silent. There are no due process provisions. There are no penalty provisions. This committee has found regulations deficient over the past couple of years. One of those was a mask mandate, and we found it deficient for the very same reason. The regulation doesn't include due process provisions. If someone wants to fight a ruling, where do they go? Do they go to the district court? Do they go to the circuit court? Do they throw themselves at the mercy of KDE? Because this regulation does not provide any due process provisions or penalty provisions, on its face, it is arbitrary. And in essence, if the reg is silent to these items, a student or school system breaks the law, the due process penalties are anything the cabinet decides. Our Constitution mandates that no regulation or law is to be arbitrary. Section 2 of the Kentucky Bill of Rights states, absolute and arbitrary power over the lives, liberty, and property of freemen exists nowhere in a republic, not even in the largest majority. Arbitrary power, according to our Constitution, does not exist in Kentucky. So for these reasons, I would advocate that everyone vote for finding this reg deficient. Any other discussion on the reg before us? Co-Chairman Hale.
Thank you, Senator West. In closing this afternoon, we've heard a lot of discussions from both sides of this. One of the final points that I take from this is that the legislature, there are 138 members of us in this legislature that are elected by our constituents. They hold us accountable. They get to hold us accountable every 2 years or every 4 years. And they can and will hold us accountable for every decision that we make or law that we pass. We have passed several pieces of legislation in this previous session that this governor vetoed, which is certainly within his power. Those vetoes came back to the legislature and were overridden by both chambers. And because the governor did not like that, then he takes this to court. And the courts have been sitting on these pieces of legislation for months, making no ruling whatsoever. The ability of this executive office individual that is sitting there now is to flaunt the decisions that the legislature makes, which is the voice of the people. Yes, he was duly elected in that position, but the 138 members of this legislature were elected to be the voice of those people. And again, they hold us accountable, and they will hold us accountable, and that is what they are supposed to do. But things that are passed in this legislature, because one person does not agree with that, does not have the right to overrule the legislative body and the legislative process. We have 3 branches of government here that work separately, but we now, as a legislature, have been put to the position that the governor makes the decisions that if he doesn't like our decisions, he just ignores them. And if this regulation is found deficient today, which I'm confident that it will, he will ignore that. the Board of Education will ignore that. And so I want to make it very clear and plain to each individual in here today. The legislature and these committees have a duty, and our duty, we are doing our duty, but our duty and our decisions are not being carried out by the executive branch. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Any other further discussion? The question is on the motion to find the regulation deficient. All those in favor of finding the regulation deficient will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Alvarado.
Aye.
Senator Yates. Representative Bridges.
Aye.
Representative Frazier.
Aye.
Representative Hale.
Aye.
Representative Marzian.
I'd like to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know that this is political theater. It's not, this is about health care. This is about our kids. This is about our state. 69% of Americans support mask mandates. This is about making sure our kids go to school and can stay in school. If you have a school that doesn't enforce mask mandates, those kids are not going to stay in that county. It's going to spread. It's a virus that doesn't know boundaries, and it's going to spread all over the state. Our hospitals will be full. They're going to collapse, and we'll be having to race to support them in the session. And I vote no. Thank you.
And Senator West.
Aye.
With 5 votes, the motion carries.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, this is Senator Yates. I got cut out, so I logged back in on my cell phone. May I make a vote no? They may mark as a no vote.
Yes, Senator. We've got you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I apologize.
We have 5 yeas and 2 nays. With 5 votes, the motion carries.
Thank you. We will move on quickly to the next regulation.
Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Department for Public Health, 902 KAR 213 emergency.
902-2213 emergency establishes requirements relating to face coverings in child care settings for staff, volunteers, visitors, parents, guardians, and all children aged 2 and older, and exemptions from the face covering requirements.
Thank you, Chairman West. This is Eric Friedlander, Secretary of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And with me I have...
Yes, hi, Wesley Duke, General Counsel for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Counsel. Is it just you two?
It's just us.
I didn't mean it that way, but please proceed. We have some people signed up for and against, not nearly as many as the first reg, but you have the floor. Please continue.
Certainly, and I will attempt to be brief. The universal use of masks as face coverings in childcare settings is recommended, as we have heard many times, by the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it is an important prevention strategy to help reduce transmission of COVID and keep children physically present in preschools and childcare settings. There's been a lot of discussion. Clearly, I do thank you all on the committee who have spoken up for vaccines. Vaccines are our way out. And I want to encourage everyone, please, to get vaccinated. Both of us are fully vaccinated in this room. Unfortunately, for kids in most of our childcare settings are not eligible for the vaccine yet. They're just not yet. Hopefully that is coming. And if we had vaccines for children under the age of 12, I would say they need to get vaccinated, and please get them vaccinated as quickly as possible. So the thing that we can do is keep them as safe as possible by asking and requiring that those children in these childcare settings and the staff wear masks. Yes, wash your hands. Yes, sanitize. Yes, to the extent you can, keep socially distanced. These are all things that we need to do. The Delta variant is now all across the world and across Kentucky. We are seeing spikes in cases, in hospitalizations, in ICU usage. I am very worried that we are getting ready to outstrip our hospital capacities. And to make one more point, there are 17 children who are today in hospitals because of COVID. That is more than we have ever had in hospitals in this state. And it is a concern. It is a concern, I think, of our common humanity and how we do need to take care of each other. And with that, I will close. I appreciate, some of you may know, I used to be the executive director of the Commission for Children with Special Healthcare Needs. Those parents with special needs children, I just want to say thank you, because that is such a hard road. Outside of what we're talking about today, thank you for taking care of. I know what a challenge it is, and I want you to know that we are here to support you as well. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. I don't know if you were listening before, but this part of the committee will follow the same path. We're going to let speakers for and against testify, and then we'll allow for a quick rebuttal. We have 5 people signed up, actually 4 signed up to speak. First, we'll have Rebecca Blankenship. Do we have Rebecca? This committee has gone on so long, we've lost Rebecca. Chuck Eddy.
It says push. I just want to say, as a citizen of Kentucky, I support this mask mandate for child care facilities, including children down to the age of 2. As I said earlier, 25% of the new cases yesterday were children under the age of 18. And these children can carry COVID-19 home to parents and grandparents. As a grandparent, I'm concerned. And as one of the people who spoke earlier said, there are many grandparents and even great-grandparents taking care of kids. It's crucial to me.
If you could hold on, Mr.
It's
Eddy.
crucial. It's crucial.
If you could hold on one moment. If you are on Zoom and not testifying, please mute your sound. Senator Yates. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. COVID-19 is easily transmissible, and it's a highly contagious, deadly disease. We should be doing everything we can to mitigate it. Masks are an important way to reduce that spread. And I believe these mask mandates are necessary to protect the students and the school staff at child care facilities. If we don't do this, we will probably end up with these child care facilities being closed. Think what that's going to mean to the economy, to the parents who are going to have to stay home with these kids. That's all. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next, we have Melanie Barker. Melanie.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can now. We can hear you. We don't see you yet, but you have 2 minutes. You have the floor. You have 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay. My name is Melanie Barker, and I own and operate a child care center in Bowling Green, Kentucky called ABC Children's Academy. I have owned a child care center now for 19 years come next month. Last year in September 2020, I formed an association with the help of Honorable Gary S. Logsdon called the Kentucky Association of Child Care Owners. It is an association to help owners and their child care providers. Before the pandemic, the child care industry was flourishing and our economy our economy was flourishing. Then the pandemic happened and the child care industry was left in a boat without a paddle. We were sinking, didn't know if we could stay afloat, while some within our child care industry drowned and could not recover. Who do we have to help us? No one. During the state of an emergency, we were allowed to reopen last June 2020. We were only allowed to reopen under tight emergency restrictions that LDCs who were allowed to stay open during the height of COVID never had to follow, not to mention had 0 reports of COVID. Nonetheless, we followed the tight emergency restrictions because at the end of the day, all of us wanted our children and families safe. However, most of us, if not all of us, already followed this type of cleaning protocol because you basically have to when you care for so many children and families per day. Thank goodness the emergency regulations were lifted a few months ago, and it has really helped our industry. But then there was another problem, staff, employees, etc. How could we attain any staff when everyone is allowed to be on unemployment? So last week, masks were mandated again, not only for child care staff, but for children 2 years and older. How was a 2-year-old or 3-year-old supposed to wear a mask? How do we, as child care providers, force a 2-year-old or 3-year-old to wear a mask? When 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds swap their masks because Joey has Batman and Johnny wants a Batman mask, how is that sanitary? When a 2-year-old and 3-year-old throw their mask in the floor, step on them and pick them up and put them back on their face, how is that sanitary? You have 2 and 3-year-olds that may sneeze and get snot all on their mask. How is that sanitary for their mask to be full of snot and up against their face to breathe back in the germs? Now, 4 and 5-year-olds are better with directions for the most part, but they like to slingshot them across the room, and then we are like, well, whose mask is this? As you can see, the masks have been a problem. The children won't keep them on. Some say they cannot breathe in them. And the ones who keep them on wear them around their neck, which defeats the purpose. We can encourage, but we cannot force. Our whole day now consists of encouraging masks on the nose and mouth, when our day should consist of teaching the children educational materials so they grow and develop. On the first day of the mask mandate, I literally had one child who's 2 years old screaming when her mom put on her mask before she entered the door. She was terrified. Terrified. She would not keep it on, and it took her a while to settle down. Now, since then, she comes in crying because she is terrified of having to wear the mask. Her dad has to walk her around the parking lot because he cannot not even bring her up to the door because she's crying, not wanting to come in. So how is this mask benefiting her to be terrified? One of my parents is an interventional cardiologist, and he has written a letter on behalf of the mask mandate for little children. He says, quote, I do not believe that mandating masks for children between 2 to 4 years of age is a good idea. First, there is a scarcity of data to support that mandating masks for 2 to 4-year-old children would be protective against the spread of COVID-19 infection. Secondly, compliance with mask wearing for 2-year-old kids is extremely doubtful. He goes on to say, quote, I think that all parents of preschool children will agree that younger children will be very unlikely to keep the mask on. Additionally, they will most likely play with their mask, drop them on the floor, exchange with the other children, and may soil them with nasal discharge, cough, etc. These activities may lead to further spread of infection rather than protection. I have had a discussion with several of my colleagues who agree, and although it is a good idea to encourage children to wear masks, it is impractical for children between the ages of 2 to 4 years old. One of his colleagues is a close friend of his who happens to be an immunologist. Finally, he says, quote, during these tough times, forcing compliance with inappropriate and premature mandates might put extra pressure on these businesses and may be counterproductive by wasting the resources on compliance rather than disinfecting and distancing protocols. Doesn't the CDC recommend the wearing of a mask? Recommend means to suggest that a particular action be done. Why and what is the scientific data to support mandating masks for small kids in child care settings? How are the masks going to help when they constantly remove them, throw them in the floor, step on them, and put them back on their face? It's basically theatrical. On behalf of hundreds of CAECO members, their staff, and their families, we ask that you lift the mask mandate, especially for our little children who attend child care. Please. It's not right. They're little, they don't understand, and the masks are doing more damage than good amongst this age group. Please reconsider and lift the mask mandate immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Tony Wheatley.
Okay, first, I am Tony Wheatley. I am with Constitutional Kentucky. Originally came in to talk about the past issue, but I will share this. I am a father of 5 beautiful daughters that have adopted me. 2 of them are medically fragile to some extent. and they will not ever wear a mask if I have my choice. And because of the issues with the mask, number one, who is the most important person we've listened to about the mask? Fauci. 3 times he has contradicted himself publicly, saying the masks do not work. And then next week they work. So when are we going to stop listening to somebody and just use common sense? First of all, a mask will not stay on a kid. I'll vouch for that because I have ages 4 to 15, and I fight with all of them. My daughter, they like to play with them at home. They don't wear them. They go to school and they pull them off, and then the teachers have to call me and say, "Hey, come and get your kid." I've been there 7 times. School started last week, and I've left them in the school for one reason. We are trying our best to develop an alternative school across the state. We currently have, in 3 days, we've had 1,100 people call us about their kids wanting to go into this alternative school. Now, you think that wouldn't make a mark in the school programs? But getting back to the daycares, we understand the battles they have. As parents, we do the same thing they do, only they do it on a broader scale. And for us to tell them they got to walk around, put the kids' mask on their head or on their face 24 or the 8 or 9 hours, some of them 11 hours a day, it's almost impossible for them to do that. They spend enough time cleaning up after the kids. If you have little kids, you understand what I'm talking about. But I think we all enjoy the rights we have. I see people in here with masks, and I see people here without masks. Shouldn't it be our choice what our kids do? I agree with Senator Alvarado and West, Senator West, Senator Representative Bridges. I think we all have to understand that we have authority to be our own parent, be the parents for our kids, and not the school system, not a daycare being pushed down by bureaucrats. So it's time we step up and say enough's enough. And we want to thank you guys for their holding up for the Constitution, because that's first and foremost. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one final presenter. We have on I believe via Zoom, we have Senator Carroll. I believe he will be testifying in his capacity as the operator of a daycare center rather than senator. Senator Carroll, are you on the line?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
I can.
And I appreciate the opportunity to comment just quickly. I want to echo the comments made by Ms. Barker. I have witnessed what has gone on since the implementation of this mandate. And it's very clear, especially with our 2 and 3 year olds, that it's definitely counterintuitive to expect that a 2 or 3 year old is going to keep a mask on. I have witnessed that we have very few kids that obviously their parents have worked with them, and even in that capacity, the masks are not remaining on, and it is a constant struggle, and it's obviously not accomplishing anything. It is making the situation worse. It is a little better with the 4 and 5 year olds, but we still don't to obtain uniformity. And our entire days would be spent putting masks back on and washing hands. That would be the extent of the development for the child each day in order to do it appropriately. And it's not productive. It's not safe. Many of the masks are being broken with rubber bands, and then you've got a 2 year old with a rubber band in their hand. So those are the things that I have witnessed, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to repeat everything that Ms. Barker said, but I too have no issue with masks, and the parents, that's a decision for them to make. But I've had fathers in tears over this with their children that felt that strongly about it, and I really don't feel like, especially with our younger kids, that it's serving any purpose whatsoever to slow down this virus. If anything, it is making it worse, simply due to the masks that are being passed around, and there's just no uniformity to it, and there's just no way to enforce and to keep the mask on kids of that age. It's just not possible, and it kind of takes away from the credibility, I think, of what the administration's trying to do when they do something of this nature, to where I'm not sure really they consulted people in child care to make sure that this was even practical to think that this could happen, because it's simply not. And that's a little disappointing. And I think it does take away from the credibility of the efforts that are being made. And it's just not healthy. It's not safe, especially for those kids. But, as a provider, we are following what the regulations, what the mandates require us to do, even though, from what I understand from reading the governor's executive order, that in this case, this is a step higher than what the CDC currently recommends. My understanding is from the governor's executive order that the CDC currently recommends that in child care centers that it's only those 2 and above who have not been vaccinated. So this is, again, as has happened throughout this entire pandemic, there are inconsistencies in how these rules are being applied. And that's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that the administration has chosen not to work with legislators and not to work as a group, as a team to navigate through this pandemic in all areas. I think we could have been much more effective as a cohesive unit. We would have differences, but the people expect us to work those differences out. And throughout this pandemic, that simply has not happened. Decisions have been made in a bubble, and it's not been, it is causing the problems that we see today that your committee has heard today in school systems and childcare. And it's really time that we all work together to make these decisions and to listen to our parents, to listen to our school administrations, to listen to our childcare facilities, the people that know what's going on and what's going to be most effective. But in this case, this mandate, we as a center were already about to require everyone to wear masks except the kids, which is where we were before. And it worked for us before. Our number of cases were very minimal. And so we feel like the rules are were very effective. And we still maintain all the cleaning and sanitization that we were doing before, as we found that to be effective. So I just wish there had been more input through this, and that maybe listened to some of the child care directors, and it would have given a little more credibility, because this part of it is just, it's unfair to the kids, especially 2 and 3 year olds. It's unfair to the parents who feel adamantly opposed to their child wearing a mask to put them through this. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Senator Carroll, for your good testimony. At this time, I'll turn it back to the cabinet. If you could keep your comments about 2 minutes. We're starting to run a little short on time. So if you could, this is the opportunity to rebut comments that have been made.
No rebuttal. We are trying to implement the recommendations, and this does implement the recommendations of the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, we'll switch to comments and questions from members of the committee. The floor is open. I don't have a list in front of me. Do we have any questions from members? Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you being here. I got a few questions for you. You probably heard some of my testimony earlier regarding the World Health Organization. And my biggest concern, again, is this goes down to the age of 2. And that as a pediatrician, I just have concerns that children at that age, I get reports from people that say these kids are trying to keep a mask on, they're chewing through them. Again, you've got basically a rubber band on each side, and kids have that. Probably not a good thing for 2-year-olds to be playing with. The World Health Organization's been pretty clear that they said that children ages 5 and under should not be required to wear masks, and that's based on the safety and overall interest of the child and the capacity to appropriately use a mask with minimal assistance. And they've done a big review of the data out there. So that's one of the concerns I've got there. I mean, I guess the question is, does the Department of Public Health have any concerns about choking or suffocation hazards associated with requiring 2 or 3-year-olds to wear face masks?
What the regulation says is that as a child 2 and up are able to do so. So just to make that clear, And the second thing, of course, you had the discussion about House Bill 1, so I won't repeat that. The only other thing then, Senator Alvarado, I just want to personally thank you for your note to me. I do appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. And again, I am sorry about that. Also, does here's some of the questions I've got, really. Does the Department for Public Health, who's issuing this underneath the cabinet, do they license and regulate child care centers and family care homes?
The cabinet does.
But does the Department for Public Health?
Right, the cabinet does.
Yes, but does the Department for Public Health under the cabinet?
I'm sorry, I'm missing. The Department of Public Health is under the cabinet. I'm sorry, I'm missing your point.
Correct. So does the Department for Public Health, which is under the cabinet, correct? Does DPH regulate child care centers and family care homes?
No, only to the extent that there are food establishment pieces. So only to some very limited extent.
Right. So I believe DCBS is the one that regulates that, correct?
It's actually the Office of Inspector General, but they work in collaboration with DCBS. Yes, sir.
Okay. Did the Department for Public Health consult with the Division of Child Care prior to filing this emergency administrative regulation?
We consulted across the cabinet through the General Counsel.
But did they, with the Division of Child Care, did they talk to them prior?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Were child care providers consulted?
That I cannot assent to. Wes, I'm sorry. No, General Counsel Wes Duke.
I can only speak to personally. I did not personally speak to anyone in the child care community. Now, who the folks up in here at DCBS Division of Child Care spoke to, I am not aware, but I personally did not speak to anyone.
Does the Department of Public Health have the authority, I guess, to impose face mask requirements in schools?
Schools.
I feel that.
Yeah, if you would, Wes.
As far as the regulatory authority of the cabinet in regard to public health and the spread of disease and things like that, we do have a broad grant of authority in 214-020 and other statutes, 211-180 and several others that deal with the spread of communicable diseases in the Commonwealth and steps to take, steps such as instituting quarantine and other actions. So there is an argument to be made that the cabinet has the authority to do so in the school setting. However, in the circumstance we're in right now, I believe that the KDE, as the governing body, they were better suited to do so. However, I would also argue that if necessary, that the cabinet and DPH and the local health departments through grants of power can take actions to prevent the spread of a communicable disease in a school setting. And a mask is obviously a tool to do that.
Sure. So I guess that's a long-winded yes, and I get your explanation on that. That was my question: is why then are we having the Department of Education rather than the Department of Public Health filing an emergency face mask reg for this, since we have the authority to do that? And it sounds like you kind of explained that. My other question also had to do with just the younger kids having to wear these face masks. Last year, the Division of Child Care required parents of children in child care centers to sign a form acknowledging that there were choking and suffocation risks associated with masking young children. What has changed with these risks between then and now?
A child who is not physically or emotionally, and it can be demonstrated that they cannot wear that mask, there is a section in this regulation that will allow that out. We are asking providers to make the good faith effort, which we have done throughout in the emergency regulation, to make the good faith effort to comply with these requirements.
So, I mean, if a child is trying to teeth through that and chewing it up, and they put it on, the child chews a hole through it, I mean, that becomes a concern here. I just don't think it's practical. I think other countries have looked at this and have had experience with Delta variant a lot longer than we have. They've collected, they've reviewed data. They don't think it's a good idea under the age of 5. So, I mean, and I guess we need some clarification on that, because I think a lot of that's what we're getting complaints about is, again, I mentioned it earlier, I think a 2-year-old would be easier to potty train in a month than to keep a mask on for a month. I mean, so how much is a good faith effort? You put it on, the kid removes it, that's good enough? Or is it a continued effort? And again, the issues that were brought up before, I think, have the same concerns there. And so maybe you can expound on that, of what's considered to be a good faith effort. If they put it on, the child removes it, that's good enough? Or do they have to be after them all day? I mean, I think I have a problem with the age range. I got a problem with it being that young. I really do.
I understand your concern. I'm not going to be a broken record on the CDC and the APA. I will not do that. Children are supposed to keep their shoes on. They're supposed to keep their pants on. I mean, there's an understanding that sometimes things like that happen in childcare, but we try to be reasonable in our regulation.
Any other members have questions at this time on this regulation? I've got a few here real quick. Previously, there was a form that a parent had to sign that stated it was a liability waiver that said if the mask possibly could cause choking and there was a hazard to children. Is the cabinet going to require parents to sign that waiver who bring their children to daycare?
That to me is a legal question, which is why I'm very happy I have the general counsel with me today.
And I think at this time that there is I don't think the cabinet has any plans to reinstitute that form or that form requirement. However, as a child care provider, as a private entity, as a private contractual relationship with a family who's providing child care to, if they choose to do such thing and obviously deal with liability and some issues there, then that's a private arrangement. I don't think the cabinet has any desire or really any authority to get involved in. But right now, the cabinet, to my knowledge, we don't have any plans to reinstitute that form or to provide that form or anything in regard to that.
Under this regulation, what happens if a daycare facility does not comply with the mandate, whether by choice or because a 2-year-old does not keep their mask on?
And I would say by choice is the way that we are looking at it. And we regulate childcare. So we have provisions under the licensure standards of complying with the standards promulgated by the cabinet. There are KRS 13B, fair hearing procedures. I sign them often. So it would be through our licensure process.
So if
did I say that correctly?
I can just add to that.
Yeah.
We enforce. I think that's a good jumping off point. We enforce our child care requirements and our child care regulations. We enforce them through 922 KAR 2190, which talks about level of about how they're regulated, the options that the cabinet has in regard to taking remedial action or penalties or counseling or things like that. And then finally, if a action is taken, there is in fact an administrative hearing procedure that is built into that regulation, and any violation or alleged violation of this regulation will be enforced pursuant to existing regulatory framework. But just to add to what Secretary said earlier, we've talked to OIG, we've sat down here in the cabinet, we discussed this, and we really are helping these child care providers to do this, to I guess alleviate their fears that they're not going to be, they're not going to be under such a heavy burden that we realize it's difficult, and we want to help them do it, and we want to help keep everyone safe. And that's kind of where we're coming from here. So, but as far as the regulatory scheme, it's in existing reg, and it provides for a fair hearing and a 13B hearing.
So that sounds great, but where is that laid out, or where is that referred to in this reg that is before us?
It is not in the body of this regulation, but as the current regulatory authority of child care, we made the decision that we will lean on existing regulation that's been on the books a long time.
So last session we passed Senate Bill 1 and HJR 77, which are currently in the court. What will happen to this regulation if SB 1 and HJR 77 are upheld?
Is it Senate Bill?
Senate Bill 1 and House Joint Resolution 77.
Senate Bill 2. Okay. I'm a little confused. I thought it was Senate Bill 2 that as far as the regulation
There was Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2, so both would apply in this situation.
Okay, just all right. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I mean, obviously, that is all pending before the court, and in regard to the competing orders of the various circuit courts that have been issued. I don't want to try to predict the future. I can say that we will comply with any order of the Supreme Court that resolves any of these issues. So at this time, I can't really predict that, but we will fully comply with the orders of the Supreme Court.
Does the preliminary injunction put in place by the Boone Circuit Court, which has not been overruled by the Supreme Court, make this regulation void for lack of legal authority?
I don't think so, because you have the injunction of the Franklin Circuit Court, which has enjoined the enforcement of the legislation that you referenced, and those two issues are sitting firmly, fully briefed to my knowledge, at the Kentucky Supreme Court as far as the competing injunctions.
Okay. I'm going to switch over to Senator Alvarado.
A couple more questions, gentlemen. Is there a definition of child care center or family child care home defined in the reg?
You'll find those definitions in the regulation that Wes referenced earlier.
Yes, Senator, those are in the existing regulations in 922 KR.
How do you all basically define those terms? My concern is this: does this include kind of preschool age kids at Sunday schools? Does this apply in that environment as well?
Not to my knowledge. Those child care regulations do not apply in those.
All right. Go ahead.
No, sir. Go ahead.
I was going to say, is the department, I guess, does DPH, are you guys aware of any developmental, kind of any behavioral health issues that are associated with kids that are that young also to require wearing face masks all day? Are you aware of anything?
We are, there are developmental issues, behavioral health issues, because we are dealing with COVID. We are going to see the impacts of that across the age spectrum. We know that the fact that we have COVID means that we are having some terrible balances, and we have to acknowledge that.
Thank you. That's all.
Co-Chair Hale.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have one quick question. I'll leave the legal questions to my attorney friends and the medical questions to my doctor friend. But from just a simple legislator, I've got a question. Why do we need this mandate right now when this was never required through the pandemic itself? Why do we need it right now presently?
We need it right now presently because we're seeing an unprecedented spike in cases and hospitalizations and ICU usage. There are more kids in hospitals now with COVID than there has been in any time during the pandemic. We need to respond.
Thank you for that answer. That was just my question.
You're welcome.
We've had, I've got a question. We've had mask mandates previously here in the state. What were the effects of those mask mandates?
We're still looking at those impacts. There are, as has been referenced before, some studies that are beginning to come out. The preponderance of scientific evidence is on the side of masks and their efficacy in prevention of transmission of disease. To the folks on this committee, and I've talked about this in front of Health and Welfare, we're going to be looking at the impacts of our response and the impacts of COVID for years to come. And I think it will take us years to figure out what things were most effective and what things were less effective. And hopefully we can learn from those things. Right now, we are going with a preponderance of scientific evidence. We're going with the CDC recommendations and the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm sorry to keep ringing that same bell. But that's what we're doing. I fully believe we are going to look back and we're going to see where we made really good decisions and where we probably didn't. But that will take us, I think, years. The changing some of the changing advice comes as science improves. So I wish I had a direct answer to your question. I'm sorry I don't. But it is some of this we are going to learn as we gain more perspective.
So in the study to bring this regulation forward, did you find that there was significant spread coming from child care centers?
We have seen a significant uptick of infections within childcare. The Delta variant is much more contagious, and so we are seeing some uptick in our childcare centers. Yes, sir.
Back to my previous comment, just want to make the point that after all previous mask mandates, when the mask mandates were started, there were significant increases in COVID after the mandates. So hopefully that won't happen here. Any other questions from members? Co-Chair Hale.
Just one more follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being patient. I want to go back to my question just a moment ago.
Yes, sir.
And the question I asked was why the mandate now, but let me just add one more thing to that. Especially for people, or especially for children that's 5 and under, why specifically for that group now?
Well, the reason is, again, I'll go back to the CDC and APA, but the other reason is there's just no vaccines for them. We don't have vaccines that go down to that age group yet, and you all have been very eloquent in that. We need to get vaccines. It is our way out. I understand there's hesitancy out there. It's the other bell I'm going to ring a bunch of times here. We really, and I appreciate the folks on this committee who have said it's important to get vaccinated, because it is, and it is our way out.
Any other questions from members? Seeing none, we are at the point in the meeting where we are open for motions. Once again, this committee has the power to ask the cabinet to withdraw, ask the cabinet to defer, or find the regulation deficient. Do we have any members wishing to make a motion? Co-Chair Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would at this time make the motion that we, as this committee, find this regulation that we are discussing presently deficient.
We have a motion. Do we have a second on the motion?
Who's second?
We have a motion and a second. This time we will have discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll chime in. I'm really a broken record. We've had mask mandates before this committee before. It's the same old song and dance. The mask mandate in the regulation says you do this, but it's silent. It says nothing about due process. It says nothing about penalties. There's no penalty provisions. These providers have no way of knowing what will happen to them if they do not comply. It was mentioned that, well, we'll have our normal licensing regulations will be put into effect. So what that tells providers is, if you mess up, we're going to pull your license. And you can sit there and say, well, we're going to work with them, but that's not what the regulation says. The regulation is silent to all due process provisions and all penalty provisions. There's no reference to those provisions. We don't even have to get to the health concerns. We can strike this, show this as deficient simply from a legal position. Attorney General Cameron said it very well in his brief to the Supreme Court. The governor, like everyone, is bound to the law. The governor defied the uncontroversial principle by issuing executive order imposing a mask mandate that he lacks the power to issue and is in fact enjoined from issuing. These facts are undisputed. First, Kentucky law, as amended by the General Assembly during its 2021 session, prohibits the governor from issuing a mask mandate. Second, the Boone Circuit Court entered a permanent injunction prohibiting the governor from violating Kentucky's new laws. And third, both the Court of Appeals and this court, the Supreme Court, have refused to stay the injunction. So it is very clear that we don't even have to get to the health concerns. The Constitution still applies. The rule of law still applies. And I would advocate a vote of yes on the deficiency motion. Sorry, I'll say that one more time. The question is on the motion to find the regulation deficient. All those in favor of finding the regulation deficient will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Alvarado.
I explain my vote, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Very briefly, just again, the issue that I have with this is the age range, down to age from ages 2 to 5. I just don't think that's appropriate. I know that there's, we've heard today saying, oh, we'll give some latitude to those people to make a good faith effort. I wish that was in the regulation, but that isn't there. And I'm in healthcare every day. I work at facilities where that's kind of what's promised. But when the moment comes in, it's if the regulation says this, you're not following it, here's the gotcha moment, we're going to go after you. And that happens in healthcare every day. So I don't know that I believe it when we hear that, saying, hey, we want to just make a good faith effort for it. I wish that was in the reg, because then if I saw it there, I'd say, okay, well, people can try, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it doesn't say you have to do this. That's my concern. I really think down to age 2 is just, I don't know that it's appropriate at that age range. So because of that, I vote yes.
Senator Yates.
No.
Representative Bridges.
May I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I look at this and I hear the word of preponderance, which is a greater weight. And what I've heard today is actually Senator Alvarado has explained a greater weight on the health concerns of a child 2 to 4, 6, wearing a mask. So if we're going to look at preponderance, and he's an expert, it's his profession, that's the reason I vote aye on this, to find this regulation deficient.
Representative Frazier.
Aye.
Representative Hale.
Aye.
Representative Marzian.
No.
And Senator West.
Aye.
We have 5 yes votes, 2 no votes. The motion passes with 5.
Thank you. The business of this committee is now concluded. Do we have any announcements or questions from members? Seeing none, do we have a motion for adjournment? Motion approved.